All right, so we've been kind of shooting the shit for a little bit. We can probably get this thing going. Alrighty. So what's going on, guys? Those of you that are here in the chat, welcome to our fourth episode of Let's Talk Comics, where myself and ComicBoom, my co-host, discuss one of the many facets of comic books, whether it be the storytelling, the creators, constructs, adaptations. We kind of touch on it all. And again, to introduce to you all my lovely and talented co-host, ComicBoom. What's going on, brother? Thank you for coming on with us tonight.
You're welcome, Dark Knight. Once again, thanks for asking me on the show. It's always great to be here and talk comics.
Always, man. So this week we're talking about the mantles in comic books, and by that we mean the pinnacles at which characters in comic books can really ascribe to. So we one of the biggest examples that I can bring up is the Bat family, and the mantle that they or that some of them eventually kind of climb to is to be Batman. So we're discussing um, the sidekicks, as you had so lovingly put it before, stepping up to the roles of their mentors, and which characters, because some of them have multiple sidekicks, deserve to take up these mantles.
Yeah, that's right. And just to give, I did when just doing a little bit of prep for this, I thought maybe I got a definition of legacy characters that I'll maybe read out because this was straight off the Wikipedia page for comic books.
Before it.
Basically, when we talk about legacy characters, we're talking about a descendant or relative of an already established hero or villain who inherits or adopts the name or attributes of the original. So it's a fairly broad term that incorporates, the sidekicks, the legacy, whether it's good or bad legacy. And so I think that's what makes this topic so interesting because I think one of the things that really stands out about legacy is it is the word legacy. Let's face it, it was all over the news. Marvel, what was Marvel criticized for in all of 2017? They were either focusing on too much of their legacy or they were
Yep.
abandoning their old legacy.
Yep.
DC with Rebirth, they were embracing their old legacy. And, everyone, what's a legacy character, what isn't, which characters work, the ones that do work, how are they different from the ones that don't? I mean, this is the topic, and yeah, it was a great. It was I credit you, Dark Knight. You came up with a good topic for this week.
Thanks, brother. It was a lot. It was just a lot of spitballing. I was like, all right, so here's a couple good things to chat about. There's no crazy news right now, so figured it would be a decent, and fairly relevant thing to talk about no matter what time of the year. Um, so, I guess we'll go into our polls of the week. And for those of you who haven't joined us before, every week that Comic Boom and I do this discussion, we just talk about a book that we have either read from this week or a book that we really anticipate. So if I'm going to be honest, I've been crazy busy, so I actually haven't read anything yet. But I would say the book that I'm probably most excited to read from this week, it might be that Silencer annual, man. Silencer's coming to Gotham, and you know that she has to tango with a little known character from the DC universe. So I'm kind of excited to see what that's going to be like because the Dark Knight's Metal, the preludes implied that they might have had some sort of previous history, especially because she was associated with the League of Assassins.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I was actually going to indicate this as well. Probably one of my favorite. It's tied. Silencer Annual is tied for my favorite pick of the week. The other one was Venom by Donny Cates was actually
Yeah.
a really great issue. Just to add with your comments on Silencer, the Silencer Annual has to do with a past tale when she it tells the story of when Silencer originally met Talia al Ghul and when Talia al Ghul started up her own offshoot group called Leviathan,
Oh
and
shit.
it's really good, and it talks about her first meeting with the Batman and what Batman thought of Silencer, and it's actually quite good. So I won't spoil anything, uh, but no, it's good. And just a comment, my pick of the week is I will go with Donny Cates has got two out. One of them is Venom First Host, And the other one is Venom. I apologize. It appears that I don't have that one in front of me, but the Venom one is actually my favorite, and that had to do with when Nick Fury and Wolverine first encountered the Venom species in Vietnam, and it's quite
shit.
good, and that's why it's called Venom.
Yeah.
I'm like, I mean, uh, if that wasn't obvious, it's only because I mispronounced it. But
No
anyways,
worries.
yeah.
That sounds cool. I really like it. Like, man, everybody's been talking about Donny Cates Venom. I really want to hop onto that once the trade is collected, for sure.
Well, Donny Cates, and that's a good segue into talking about the legacy characters, because one of the things I love about Donny Cates is that he's a lot like Jeff Johns. He's a fan first, and he understands the importance of legacy. And the brilliance of what Donny Cates has done with Venom is that he has taken he's taken the concept as originally created, and he's built on it. He's built on the history, and he's incorporated all the past. He's incorporated the legacy of Venom with everything else, and he's even he's done it in such a masterful way that he's even incorporated some of Thor continuity. So he's not only respected Venom continuity, the legacy of Venom, but also Thor, because the Venom symbiote is actually a god, and the god, of course, was the sword that found its way. That's why Thor number 4, I think, has gone up in value, because that's the first appearance of the Venom sword. I forget the name of it.
That's pretty cool.
Anyways, yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, he seems like he's really kind of building a lot around the symbiote and adding a lot of new mythology to it. So that'll be really cool to check into, because I feel like a lot of times writers tackle Venom because people know that, the character on a cover is going to sell a book better than if they were to write a lower tiered character. So it's good to see that somebody actually cares about the character and wants to do something with him.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be a trademark for a lot of up and coming writers. Their preference is always to take a more obscure character, because they have more freedom to do what they want with it and make it popular. But yeah.
Cool.
But in any event, yeah. So well, we can get started if you want to talk about Batman, because boy, Batman's got to top the list, doesn't he, for number of legacy characters or sidekicks?
That and I think that there's a couple reasons as to why I think he's probably the hottest topic on the list. There's that he has the biggest quote unquote superhero family in comics, no debate. B, he's human, so we've even seen other people step up and take the role of Batman in his absence. So it's not like it's a weary question to ask, because DC hasn't been afraid to do it before, albeit temporary. So for those of you who don't know, I guess a definitive list of the Bat family, not including our Lord and Savior Alfred, would be Dick Grayson, currently Nightwing, the first Robin; Jason Todd, Red Hood, the second Robin; Tim Drake, Red Robin, the third Robin; and then I guess Stephanie Brown hasn't been Robin in this continuity yet. But spoiler, Stephanie Brown, she was Robin in the pre-New 52 continuity. Damian Wayne, the son of Batman. We have Harper Row, who hasn't really seen, much action lately. Bluebird. Orphan, Cassandra Cain. And we have Duke Thomas, the Signal. Am I missing anyone?
You know what? We probably are, but I don't think so. I think you pretty much got everything covered there. You could, I suppose, theoretically maybe include Lucius Fox or Batwing.
Yeah, there's also Barbara Gordon too, Batgirl.
Right, Barbara Gordon. Yeah, so I guess they're sort of they're legacy characters, I guess, in that, and sort of they sort of also Jean-Paul Valley was Batman.
Jean-Paul Valley, yeah, and he's currently still kind of in the Bat family based on that.
Yeah, that's right. He's Azrael, so, and he's he was quite active in Detective Comics during Brian Hill's run, I believe, or Tinian's run.
Or Titans, yeah, and he'll also be in the Justice League Odyssey. In the chat, Aaron says, shouldn't Jim Gordon be counted in there too? I know it was a fill-in, but New 52. I see where you're coming from, but I'm gonna have to say no. Like, I totally get where you're coming from because we had like chappy suit Batman, and by that I mean Jim Gordon is Batman. But I don't think that I would put him on in the same field as the rest of the Bat family, because I feel like as much of a cool idea as that was, I don't think there's as much of a validity of Jim Gordon really taking the mantle and making it his own, like an argument could be made for the rest of the Bat family. But I mean, that's an interesting like side topic. Is Jim Gordon part of the Bat family? Well, I would probably almost say it depends on where you're looking at in continuity, because right now Jim Gordon doesn't know Bruce's identity, so I would probably say no.
It's weird because his Jim Gordon when he was Batman, that very clearly is part of continuity, because that only because of Batman coming back and reclaiming the mantle from Jim Gordon. He did so. He died, and it was Dionysium that resurrected him, and that's part of Metal. So I think that whole storyline inferentially connects to the storyline in Metal. So I think continuity-wise, Gordon's there. Did Jim Gordon never knew Batman was Bruce Wayne, did he, throughout that entire Scott Snyder run?
No, like I said in continuity, Jim Gordon doesn't know that Bruce Wayne is Batman.
Yeah. But he definitely continued the legacy aspect of it. He felt that Gotham City needed a Batman. So in the sense, I think he clearly embraced the role.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just don't think that he has the same calling to the legacy of Batman like a couple of the people we'll be talking about in this episode. But it's a good question for sure. It's definitely a good thing, an interesting thing to think about. Yeah. I feel like we have to start and address the elephant in the room, and that is Nightwing, Dick Grayson, who I will say I probably think he's the most suited to take up the mantle of Batman over anyone else. I think there's an argument to be said for Tim Drake, but I think that overall Dick Grayson is a much more well-equipped successor to Bruce Wayne as Batman. And I think it's because he's both similar and dissimilar to Bruce in a lot of ways. You know, you can very clearly tell. He is, for all intents and purposes, the child of Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne raised the kid. Bruce Wayne taught him how to be a man. Bruce Wayne taught him how to do half the things that he does in his life. And, you know, there's always that sponge-like quality to being raised by someone where you take up a lot of their qualities. But Dick Grayson also has... Dick Grayson is a lot better at, I would say, knowing when he's... Well, no, I wouldn't say that, no. Bruce also knows when he's been beaten. Dick Grayson just has a lot of different qualities to him that make him a different Batman. Do I think he has the capability to be a better Batman than Bruce? To be honest, I don't think singularly any member of the Bat family can be a better Batman than Bruce. But I think that Dick Grayson, like, he's proven himself, you know, whether it be Grant Morrison's run with Batman and Robin or like his normal Batman run post Final Crisis. I thought he was a great Batman. And me as a diehard Bruce Wayne fan, I wasn't even mad that Dick was Batman for a while because I felt like he deserved it. Like, Battle for the Cowl cemented him as my favorite member of the Bat family, barring Bruce and Alfred.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I have I think what I consider a close second to Nightwing, but no, I got to go with Nightwing because Dick Grayson, frankly, I always consider is Batman without the mental dysfunction. Mm-hmm. It's Batman's edge, but also his weakness is the same thing in my mind, and it's his obsession. And he's relentless, and he prepares, and he never gives up. But that also is the one reason why Batman is, I think that's one of his greatest weaknesses as well, because his obsession sort of creates him having dysfunction in some of his personal relationships. Whereas I think Dick Grayson has much more of a propensity for happy relationships. One thing in the DC universe, everybody loves Dick Grayson. Everybody loves Nightwing.
Well,
Everybody likes Nightwing, but when it comes to Batman, Bruce Wayne, a lot of people have very mixed feelings about Batman. It's very hit and miss, but everybody loves Dick Grayson. I can't think of a
yeah.
character really that doesn't, off the top of my head. But
Well,
maybe I stand to be
I
corrected.
think that, and hear me out. I think Bruce Wayne is the best Batman ever. But I think arguably, and I've seen a lot of people talk about this. I think that Dick Grayson can potentially claim a stake as one of the greatest characters in the DC universe. And I don't think that a lot of people think about that. I mean, he is the first legacy character in all of comics. In all of comics. Not to mention, via Judas Contract and the New Teen Titans, he's also the first to realize that there's not necessarily one way to doing things. You know what I mean? He realized that he can take an approach to crime fighting and his personal life that stray away from what Bruce did, but he also recognizes some of the things that Bruce did that were right. So I think that there's a lot to be said about Dick Grayson, and coinciding with what you said, he is personality wise probably some amalgamation between Superman and Batman. Superman had a big influence on Nightwing. If you guys in the chat don't know, Nightwing actually got his name from Superman. And for me, like, if I were ever able to write a comic, I would love to write a story about Superman and Dick Grayson. And even more so, like, random little side tangent, I'd love to write a story about Superman and Jason Todd, because they both died. And that's something that I think is a really interesting connection to discuss. But Dick Grayson, for my money, is the most prepared and is the most, I guess, he's the most suited for the job. I don't think anybody else would be better suited. We've seen everybody else, for the most part, try and fail. I mean, hell, Stephanie Brown can't even be a good Robin.
Well, a quick point. Stephanie Brown is by far, I think, she's my number one worst legacy character. I hate Stephanie Brown. I've never liked Stephanie Brown. I never will. I don't like her. Spoiler. I don't like her. Period.
I think she's
I'm just not a big fan of her for multiple reasons. But I will admit that when she's well written, she can be an entertaining character. I'll give her that much. And I kind of like her for drama sometimes.
Drama, yeah.
But she's all drama, and boy oh boy do I feel sorry for Tim Drake. That I don't know what he fell in love with, but good God, is he in for, I'm a divorce lawyer for occupation. If I met Tim, I'd give him my card and I'd say, look, man, get out now. Get out now. All the signs are there of a disaster. Get out now.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think Stephanie Brown, like you said, she is a plot device for drama. And that's about it. You know what I mean? The only time, like the times that people try to make her serious, I don't think it's worked. The most influential she's ever been in comics is when she died. You know what I mean? And that's only because it generated a really good conflict between Tim Drake and Bruce Wayne. So So with that being said, we'll kick Stephanie to the curb. She has no stake in the mantle for Batman, or for that legacy. I think that Tim Drake would probably be my second choice if Dick Grayson weren't Batman. I think that I don't know, like, if you guys have read James Tynion's run on Detective, but they had like this future Tim Drake that was from that was spawned kind of out of Jeff Johns' like future Teen Titans, and the dude was a fucking badass. Like, he swept the entire Bat family. I think Tim Drake has the potential to be like the most badass Batman. I mean, shit, he beat the entire family in a hand-to-hand fight. It's cool as hell.
Well, yeah. Well, I read that storyline, and I just I didn't mind it. My comment would be is that he had the benefit of coming from the future. He knew what he would do. He had literally years to prepare for that. And quite frankly, I would argue that any member of the Bat family, with given that much time and prep, would be able to have done the same thing. We can agree to disagree on that. I personally, I wouldn't give Tim Drake my choice. I think Tim Drake is more of an academic. I think he's extremely intelligent. He's extremely good. He's very good. I know he's a fan favorite. I know he's a you know, some people put him even ahead of Nightwing. So I know he's a fan favorite.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Tim Drake was very well written when by Jeff Johns and his relationship with Wonder Girl during John's run on Teen Titans. So particularly his friendship with Connor Kent, Superboy, and all that leading into Infinite Crisis when Connor Kent died, and he's got probably one of the most well developed characters in the Bat family, and frankly, I would say in the last 15 years, I think a convincing argument can be made that Tim Drake's character has been better developed than Dick Grayson. I think you can come up with that argument. And I think that's why he's got such a strong following. However, at the end of the day, my heart's still with Dick Grayson. And for Tim, to me, Tim's the guy to me that just wants to settle down. I really loved when they took Tim out of the picture, where he was going to go back to school. He was leaving the Bat family to go back to school. He was going to settle down with, that was before he died. But, killed by who we thought was maybe Dr. Manhattan or whatever, but he wasn't really dead. I really like that ending for Tim. I thought he deserved that. He's a super smart kid. He deserves to be changing the world, but not. He shouldn't be in the shadows, Tim Drake. He should be out in the world as Tim Drake.
I agree and disagree. I see where you're coming from, but I think the thing with Tim is that out of anybody in the family, he's the one that most wants to be there. He wants to be Batman, unlike everybody else in the Bat family. Through Battle for the Cowl, we learned that Dick is easily, probably the most hesitant to taking up the Batman mantle when it came to those in the family at the time. And Tim was the one that kind of was like, all right, well, someone has to do it. And at one point in the book, he puts on the cape and cowl and fails, but he does it. He's the one that wants to do it the most. And I see what you're saying, and I think that, out of love for Tim Drake, I see, wanting to give him a good life and let him make a positive change in a more on a more public level. But I think that he will always have a place in the Bat family because he's the one that wants to be a part of it the most, more than anyone else. I think that Tim Drake, and I think that, and in regards to with the, him smacking down the family, I think that I don't think anybody would have been as prepared as he was. I see what you're saying, and he wouldn't have been able to do it without all that prep time. But I think Tim Drake next to Bruce is. I mean, he's even been said to be more strategic than Bruce. So I think there's a big quality.
And you make a good point. The other thing I would concede and give you, and this is based on just recent. This just came out in the last 6 months in the pages of Nightwing. I don't agree with it, but apparently they're now establishing Dick Grayson as someone who doesn't like technology. He doesn't like computers. He doesn't like technology as a way to try to further distinguish him from Tim Drake. Tim Drake is like a god with computers. He can hack into anything. Yeah. And I think they make Tim Drake too intelligent, to be quite blunt. But so be it. But now they're making Dick Grayson. He's just sort of this acrobat. He's more hands-on. He's more tactile. He likes the grace of movement, and because from his acrobatic days, and he sort of shuns technology. So looking at it from that perspective, I think in terms of the whole package, maybe I'd grant you that Tim Drake maybe is certainly coming out as being a little more of maybe the more full package in terms of not just good at hand-to-hand combat, but also the other knowledge. But
well, I think that Tim Drake's biggest shortcoming when it comes to, I guess, the qualities of being Batman is probably his hand-to-hand prowess. But I see him kind of being the one to build. If he were to become Batman, he would be the one to build a Batman Beyond-esque suit that would, make him excel in the places where he doesn't. I think that I understand what they're doing with Dick Grayson. It makes sense. One of the biggest complaints of Tim Drake fans is that Dick Grayson kind of took on a lot of the positives that people loved about Tim, and it kind of lowers Tim on the pedestal of the Bat family. Tim Drake was my favorite Robin, admittedly. until I read Battle for the Cowl, and Dick Grayson was the one to smack up Jason Todd and make him call him daddy. You know what I mean? And Tim Drake got smoked. And since then, Dick has taken on a lot of the positive qualities that Tim has. I think that there is to find a balance and say that Dick Grayson is probably the most well-rounded Robin, or the most well-rounded member of the Bat family. I don't know how I feel about making him like a technological idiot, but I mean, he's certainly no Tim Drake or Barbara Gordon when it comes to technology, for that matter. So,
yeah, I just let me grab my. Sorry about that. I gotta plug in my phone here; it'll die.
yeah,
But
no,
yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about their tendency now to make Nightwing. Not that he's a technological idiot, but he's not a big fan of technology, and that's TC's gotten some pushback from Nightwing fans over that. And but building on the Tim Drake Nightwing thing, I want to talk. I want to talk about Damian now,
I
because
agree. Yeah,
the only reason if the heroes could age, and we were talking 10 years from now, my pick would be Damian. Because I think Damian has got the benefit of, I love the interaction between when Grant Morrison was writing Nightwing as Batman, and then Damian. That I forget how many issues it was, but that's my favorite portrayal of Damian in those early issues, with the interaction between Damian and Dick Grayson when Dick Grayson was Batman. Dick Grayson is an awesome uncle to, or whatever, uncle,
big brother
figure to big brother to Damian. And I see Damian dealing with all his narcissism when he's young, and I see him as Damian as he gets older. If he between learning all the skills of his father, tempered by the more of the compassion and the grounding of Dick Grayson, and the technological prowess of Tim Drake, I think Damian is. I don't know how he can avoid being the best, quite frankly.
no, Damian by far has the most potential, and if you look at the Robins, they're all these fragments of Bruce Wayne that haven't quite found a way to meld it all together and be better than Bruce. You know what I mean? Dick Grayson is the athleticism and the heart of Bruce Wayne. Jason Todd is the anger and aggression. Tim Drake is the mind. And Damian really has all of those things, but he lacks the heart of Bruce Wayne. And that was the thing that held him back. And I agree. I think that Damian Wayne has the most potential to be maybe even a better Batman than Bruce. But it bars his character development. Where he stands now, he's on a positive trend with him teaming up with John and being part of the Teen Titans. Well, I mean, we'll see where we're at in Teen Titans. He's kind of a dick. But in the hands of the correct writer, if he were to develop as a character, I mean, he has the potential to be, like I said, maybe even a better Batman than Bruce. I think that in an ideal world, him and John grow up and they continue to develop as characters, and they are the ones that succeed their fathers as the two biggest pillars in the DC universe. I would not mind if we got to that point one day. I mean, I know comics are cyclical and we get back to things, but I would love some sort of story with Damian as a developed Batman, where maybe Dick Grayson dies and he realized that he has to be the heart of the Bat family, or something like that. That'd be a great story. DC, hire me. But I agree. In all fairness, I do agree. I think that Damian does have the most potential, but I think that his future in comics right now is very ambiguous. It really depends on who's writing him. Because you have guys that like Tomasi that humanize him and develop him, and then you have what Adam Glass is doing, and he's just kind of like teenager, rebellious. Like, I'm gonna kind of make it look like I shot Black Mask off panel. We'll see. But I think that there's a lot of validity to what you were saying about Damian.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Damian, my favorite stories are when they I like when he I like when his narcissism and his youthfulness get him in trouble. Those are the best stories. I'm really enjoying Teen Titans right now, with the last few issues. But if I had one minor criticism, is I'm not a big. I prefer not to have Damian in an overly leadership role. I just don't think it's appropriate. Do I think Damian is very intelligent and he can handle some leadership? Yes, I do. For a 13-year-old. But I don't care how smart you are at 13. You are only 13. There are some things where you cannot replace life experience. You cannot replace life experience on the ground and relationship experience and knowing people and instinct and what age and wisdom brings you. And that's where I think some writers assume a little bit too much on Damian, and I like what Patrick Gleason did and Tomasi when they wrote him, is that he made mistakes and he got hurt, and he put up a brave face, but then he'd cry in the corner, and he'd shed tears, and that's what prevented me from hating him, because he's a narcissistic kid and he's funny, but he's kind of a dick.
But he's still a kid.
He's still a kid, right? And so I hope they don't lose sight of that. And sometimes I feel they lose sight of that when they write him. They forget that, hey, remember, this is only a 13-year-old kid.
I agree. I think that I want to see him in the leadership role only for him to fail and learn from it. I think that, honestly, what I want most from him, I want to see a character arc similar to Dick Grayson in season 1 of Young Justice, where it's very obvious that this character will be a leader someday and will by far be the best suited to lead a team. But right now, he has a lot to learn. And I want Damian to go through a very humbling experience where he realizes it's not his time yet. Kind of like Dick Grayson did in the first season of Young Justice. I think that would be a really great way to develop Damian and make him a little bit more humble. I like what's going on in Teen Titans because he's entering teenagerdom. And that kind of rebellious phase, I feel like, even though he had it, is almost still necessary to do. My highlight for Damian, I gotta say, I think Tomasi wrote the best Damian Wayne. I think Peter Tomasi writes the best Damian Wayne. I think that his Batman and Robin is quintessential to Damian as a character. I think that Grant Morrison's Batman and Robin will always hold a certain place in the pantheon of DC. But I think that if you want to read a book about Damian developing, I think that Batman and Robin is by Tomasi. You get this over a span of X amount of issues, and you get to see his relationship with his father. And I think that and again, I'm not discrediting Morrison's Batman and Robin. It's one of my favorite runs in all of comics, for sure. But if you guys really want to get to know Damian Wayne, New 52 Batman and Robin by Peter Tomasi and Patrick Gleason, incredibly underrated.
I agree. So let's give the women some love here. So we know what Nightwing and Tim Drake and Damian bring to the table. So what does Barbara Gordon? What does the feminine influence of Barbara Gordon and even Batwoman? What do they bring to the equation?
That's a good question. I think that Barbara actually probably has one of the greater footings in the Bat family, not necessarily for the mantle of Batman, but for staking a position permanently in the Bat family throughout time. She's intelligent. She's, barring whatever the hell they're doing with her in the New 52 and making her like a child and then making her kind of rapey in the Killing Joke movie.
Yeah.
I think she's always been one of the more level-headed characters and one of the ones to think things through the most. And I think if they brought that Barbara Gordon back, she has a stake to be a future Batman's second in command. I think that there's a lot of value in Barbara as a character and her being the pensive type. You know what I mean? She's not very reactive. And I think that's someone who leads, a team, like a Bat family team. I think that's absolutely necessary. In my ideal future, where we no longer have a Bruce Wayne Batman, Dick Grayson is my Batman. Damian Wayne takes up the mantle of Nightwing because I don't think anybody else should take that mantle because of the relationship that Dick and Damian have together. I think that Barbara Gordon is either an Oracle character or a Batwoman type of character. And I don't know if most of you know this. Did you know the Batwoman costume was meant for Barbara? The
I
red
did not
wig
know that.
and the
No.
black with the red bat. It was created like years before Kate Kane came out, and that was designed by Alex Ross, and it was meant to be Batgirl maturing into this new role, Barbara Gordon, and she was going to have the wig so that people didn't realize that they were still going to use that like super red wig, so that people didn't realize that it was the same person stepping up from Batgirl to Batwoman. But that was originally meant for Batgirl, and I think that someday in my head canon, Batgirl becomes Batwoman, not in the sense of being a Kate Kane-esque legacy character. I think that she just steps up to that mantle and retains her position with the Bat family. Otherwise, Oracle, her being Oracle is always the way to go. And I always kind of saw Tim Drake being the one that's kind of, he's not out of the Bat family, but how after like Final Crisis, like he kind of went out and did his own thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I saw Tim Drake. I kind of saw him being like, you know what, I have a way of doing things, and the family's here, and I will always help them, but I'm going to go out and do my thing. So
I find with Barbara Gordon, this probably sounds a little bit cliche, but quite frankly, I think that DC did the cliche thing initially with Barbara Gordon, and I think it's sort of stuck, and that is that it's the classic differences between men and women. Women always have a better connection with themselves emotionally. And quite frankly, you need to have a Bat player. You need to have a member of the Bat family that's a little bit more in connection with their emotions and is not afraid. Okay, now we can, we're two guys talking here. If we could risk getting slapped by women if we were to suggest that, what's the old expression? Women are 80% emotional, 20% logic, and men are 80% logical, 20% emotional, or whatever the case might be. I think there's some truth to that. The men are from Mars, women are from Venus type of idea. And I think with Barbara Gordon, you need to have someone who, there was I think it was the Death in the Family, Scott Snyder's run there when they had around the table. I think Barbara Gordon's contribution, she's got a very unique and interesting perspective on each member of the Bat family. And she's got a lot of keen insights, and she's not afraid to express herself. Let's face it, in many ways, Tim Drake, Jason Todd, Damian, Dick Grayson, and Bruce Wayne, you put them in a room, they're not exactly going to hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and open up emotionally. Barbara Gordon, when she's present in a room with them, they communicate better. In many ways, she's like the soul of them. And she's like the soul gem. She connects them all a little bit more emotionally. They're a little bit more emotionally open with each other. And I think that's usually what happens, I find, when writers have her in the same room with them. You have a little bit more dialogue, a little bit more revelation.
She also adds a lot. Emotionally, intellectually too. She's one of the most intelligent characters, I think, in the DC universe, barring, high school Batgirl that's going on right now. And I think like James Tynion probably wrote her the best she's been written in a while. After Kate Kane had killed Clayface, and they kind of had like the round table. And Barbara Gordon held a lot of ground in the conversation, and she makes a lot of good points. And I think, like you said, she is arguably the soul of the Bat family. I think that she kind of brings she's the devil's advocate, so to speak, in the Bat family, and she kind of checks people and is a little bit less reactive, I guess, to what's going on. She tends to think of things in a greater scheme, even more so than someone like Tim Drake.
Well, she's the one that says, it reminds me of that classic phrase from the movie Hangover, check yourself before you wreck yourself. That's Barbara Gordon. She'll show up and she'll tell you that. And definitely.
So my question to you is, in the mantle of the Bat, where do you see some of these newer legacy characters standing in the Bat family? So we have Signal, Duke Thomas, Harper Row, who I thought, like, in the New 52, I was like, oh man, like, she's going to be dope. They're going to really do some things with her. I was wrong. And then Cassandra's not new, but she is one of the younger members of the Bat family. So pertaining to those three in particular, because, we've already kind of kicked Stephanie Brown to the curb because, fuck Stephanie. Where do you see those three younger members of the Bat family being in the overall mantle?
I've said this on one of our previous discussions. My favorite character in the DC universe is Cassandra Cain.
Mhm.
So I have a very much a bias. I followed her from the beginning. I love Cassandra Cain, and even though we talked about Barbara Gordon being the soul of the team, I think Cassandra Cain brings an innocence and a grace of movement. I've always seen her as being raised in the language of motion and body movement, and she's so caring, and she was raised by the world's deadliest assassin, and yet against her nurture, her nature overrides that, and she shows compassion, and she's got love and compassion, and I think that she's just an amazing character, Cassandra Cain, and I think the only reason I wouldn't have her necessarily assume the mantle of the Bat is, I think at the end of the day, uh, I don't think she has the capacity to have the type of darkness needed to be a Batman. Because I think to be an effective Batman, you need to have some ability to channel some darkness, some grit,
Yeah.
and I love Cassandra Cain for that reason. I think
I,
she's the heart and soul. She's the heart and the soul of the team for me. She's sort of like she's arguably the best fighter,
oh,
but at the end of
I think that the only one that would even give her a run for her money is Bruce in her
that's
family.
right, and that's because he just he's just I always say Batman can win any fight because every fight takes place in a particular environment, and Batman's the best at utilizing the environment to compensate for whatever
He
fighting
lacks.
shortfall he might have.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's because Batman is always thinking four-dimensionally, whereas a lot of fighters are just thinking in terms of the movement and not what's
Yeah.
around them.
Yeah.
So that's the difference between Batman and anyone else. It's that instant being able to prepare and to simply know your environment like that. Plus, he's got his utility belt, which is always a wild card. You don't know what he's got in that damn belt.
Yeah,
And
I think physically, I mean not like strength wise, but like physically in terms of fighting prowess, I think she has him beat. But it's the fact that Batman not only incorporates his skill as a fighter, but his mind and his penchant for strategy. Uh,
yeah, and with respect to Bluebird, uh, I don't. I never paid much attention to Batman and Robin Eternal, so I really don't know a lot about Harper Row. I know she's a fan favorite. I'll have to let you comment on her. You can tell me something about her. What makes her so enduring to you?
I mean, I just thought that the idea of here's the thing, like I'm not one for like inserting characters for the sake of diversity, but it felt like we had, because Barbara at that point I think was already doing the whole Burnside thing. You know what I mean? So she's like this young yippy teenager in high school, fucking dealing with boys. I was like, all right, bye, Barbara. I've never liked Steph, and like we got like this gritty, like grease on the hands, female member of the Bat family that was different from everyone else. You know what I mean? She has a bit of her own tragic backstory. For those of you,
Got a cool look too. I like her hair.
yeah, her suit was dope as hell. Like the blue mask, and she had that little electric gun. I thought that she was a really cool idea. And then after Batman and Robin Eternal, it was like, all right, like bye Harper. Like we got all these other characters to worry about, and now she's like, you see her every once in a while in Tynan's Detective, where it's like, she's at a hospital. She's alive. Like she's doing stuff. I loved, and like there were just some really cool images. Like there was during Snyder's Batman run, I want to say it was like maybe issue 21. It was somewhere around there, where they did like this little preview of Batman and Robin Eternal, or Batman Eternal, even Batman, I think so. And it's just like Bruce and Harper in like this apocalypse, and they're just sitting there like hashing it out with all these villains. I was like, this is a dope image. Like I want her to exist, and if nothing, to see some sense of this image later on. This is cool as hell. And I think that she just personally she adds a lot. She adds a flavor of personality to the team. She's sassy. She's kind of like, she's very convicted in her ideas, and if anybody differs from her, she's like, no, like fuck you. Like you're gonna hear out what I have to say. Just she was a cool character, and then she's kind of been like delegated to this sense of nothingness. Like I think it was Batman Eternal, or it might have been Batman and Robin Eternal again. I don't remember. Where she gets a lot of like involvement with Tim Drake, and I really would have loved for Tim Drake to eventually step up, become his own thing almost, and have Harper as his protege. I thought that would have been really cool because Tim deserves it just as much as as Dick deserved being Batman. I think Tim is kind of at this point where he's been fighting crime for, I mean, in continuity. What's it been, like 3, 4, 5 years now?
Yeah.
So I mean, I would have loved to see that, and I think there are things you can do with Duke Thomas. I will put out the side tangent that I think his name is stupid. I liked when fans were positing that his name was Lark. I liked the continuous bird theme with Batman. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's a place for Duke Thomas if he's written well.
Yeah, I actually think that. Well, if I'm brutally honest, I think it's more realistic. As much as I love the standard Bat family of Dick Grayson, Damian, Tim Drake, etc. Duke Thomas to me makes the most sense as an apprentice to Batman. He just does, and frankly, it's because of his race. It's because of his race. He's raised in the more difficult parts of the city. He's got his parents were. He's in the crime-ridden part of the city. Remember, he was introduced in the pages of We Are Robin during the DCU era.
Well, he was introduced in Zero Year.
Well,
him as a hero. Yeah, he hadn't really taken up.
Fair enough. I stand corrected. He came into his own in We Are Robin. Like he sort of led that whole group, and then now that he's known as the Signal. It makes a lot of sense that this is a kid that would know how to fight. He's street smart. He learned that. He learned the hard way. I mean, this notion that there's something unrealistic about Tim Drake learned everything about the streets by reading a bunch of books and knowing how to hack into a computer. I'm sorry, you ain't gonna know nothing about living on the streets or knowing who to go to on the streets to get information by reading a bunch of books or what have you. I mean, Duke Thomas has that naturally. He could educate Batman on where to go in some parts of Gotham. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And that's the advantage they have with Duke Thomas, and plus Duke has I like Duke's confidence, and I really like the fact that I think his ethnicity is actually a plus. I think it's about time. And I'm not jumping on this bandwagon about diversity. I mean, he's just a great character. And plus, I really love Black Lightning. I love that Black Lightning's coming into play. Another African-American, great character. They're going to have the Outsiders now.
Yes.
As an offshoot, led by... I mean, that's going to be fantastic. And I would love to see the Signal join the Outsiders. I don't know if he will, but
he is. He is. Have you seen it? Okay. They released the first cover, and they show... It's a pretty small group. It's Batman, Black Lightning, Katana, Cassandra, and Duke.
Oh, I would love that. I'm so that is my I think that's a fantastic idea for a group, and really if even the name Outsiders, obviously it's an established name, but they really are in many ways outsiders. They're almost like the outsiders of the Bat family. There's so many ways that name is so perfect for them that yeah.
I mean,
I'm missing Geoforce. But.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna get him. We had like the teases to Geoforce in the middle issues of Brian Hill's Detective Run, like when Batman met Karma, he was actually in Markovia. Right. So I think we're gonna get like Geoforce eventually, and maybe some other famous Outsiders characters. I mean, Metamorpho's being taken up right now, so I don't think we're gonna, but we'll see a couple. I think that you know what I mean. Like I like Brian Hill, and excuse me. I think that he's going to develop Duke on the same level that Scott Snyder tried to, because Scott, had all these other things like All-Star Batman and Robin, or not Batman, All-Star Batman. Duke was kind of the ride-along character, and we got to see a lot more develop for him. And then you had like the Cursed Wheel, like little backstories, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like he's kind of getting a fast track training in the Bat family. I was like, it makes sense. Like Batman, this isn't his first time around. Like he has to have some sort of like regimented program that's better, you know, that kind of takes a quicker and better approach than he did for any of the other kids. I think that there's a lot of cool things to be done with Duke, and in regards to the diversity standpoint, he was natural. He never felt forced. Scott Snyder introduced him as a kid in Zero Year who saved Batman after getting, you know, kind of tossed to the curb and left out in the wild. And I think that the relationship that he has with Bruce is really interesting because Bruce didn't save him. He saved Bruce. And like Bruce, you know, in the end, you know, when Duke's parents got Jokerized, like Bruce did save him, but it was like it reverses the order, because I think in most of the Bat family have saved Bruce in some way from himself, but Duke saved Bruce before Bruce saved him. You know what I mean? So I think that there's a really interesting relationship to be had with Bruce and Duke, and I think that I just want to see him develop as a character. I love the fact that he exists, and you know, as long as he's written well, I'll love him. I don't know if you read, like, when they did that Future's End one shot and Duke was Robin and he had that dope like tech suit. I was like, this is awesome. Like if he becomes Robin and they do something else with Damian and this is what we get, I was like, I'm totally fine with that. And then they scrapped all of that. But like I think that book in particular, that Batman and Robin Future's End, I was like, I officially love Duke Thomas. Like I want to see him do more. So I hope that, you know, I think that he's in capable hands with Brian Hill, and I think that Brian, just from what I've seen with him in his Detective and Michael Cray, I think that he's going to develop Cassandra and Duke where they currently stand in the landscape, and I'm excited to see where they go with that. And I hope we get to see both of their relationships with Bruce in a little bit more light.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think we covered the Bat family, didn't we?
Hardcore for like a solid 40 minutes. So I guess.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, unless you had anything else to say about the Bat family, I did have another good.
No, go. No, next topic.
So I feel like the next legacy of characters I'm bringing up here is the natural second to Dick Grayson. This character, for all intents and purposes, was Marvel's reaction to Dick Grayson in the 40s, and that is Bucky Barnes taking over as Captain America for Steve Rogers. And I do also want to throw in there Falcon. And I wonder, you know, who you, ComicBoom, and who the folks in the audience think has a better ground to stand on when it comes to taking the mantle of Captain America from Steve Rogers. Did you want to kick off on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to pick. I really don't. To me, that's like you're asking, and I'm not trying to give a typically. In Canada, we call it a Canadian answer when you don't give a straight answer when you say maybe. But I don't mean to be typically Canadian, but to me, it's like you're asking me what's my favorite fruit, an apple or an orange. Well, I love apples and I love oranges. Frankly, to answer your question, Bucky Barnes was clearly the legacy character for Captain America, but in a different time. And Sam Wilson, I think, is a natural heir to Captain America. And he was Sam Wilson, Captain America. He had a stellar run. It was a really good series. It just happened to coincide alongside Secret Empire, which you and I both know got a lot of bad press from Marvel. It created, we don't want to talk about the whole controversy of Comicsgate versus SJWs and all that jazz, but quite honestly, the stories of Sam Wilson, Captain America, the way Nick Spencer wrote him about how I thought it was very well written. Some people disagree with me, but I thought it was very well written that Sam Wilson as Captain America, he wasn't able to be as successful as Steve Rogers Captain America because he was black. He wasn't given the benefit of the doubt because of his skin color. That's what some of the stories were clearly suggesting. Some of the extra struggles he had because of the people on the ground. It dealt with racism. It dealt with those issues. It dealt with that degree of politics, and that was despite a lot of the hard work and the heroism of Sam Wilson. And I think Sam Wilson was a very good heir, a very good legacy character, precisely because, frankly, he was heroic, but also because of the controversy.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you think about that.
I think that this really all comes down to opinion. I don't think that choosing between Sam Wilson or Bucky Barnes to take over the mantle of Captain America is one of those things that you can say that you can even remotely, I guess, suggest that there is a level of objectivity to. You know what I mean? I don't think either one of them is objectively going to be a better suited successor to Steve Rogers, because I think they both have two distinctly different things to add. I'm actually, in a sense, on your opposing end. I think that Bucky is the natural successor to Captain America. I think that the reason, and I think that he is the natural successor to Steve, for one of the same reasons why I think Dick Grayson's the natural successor to Batman, in that they're both very different from their mentors. They both have a lot of very similar experiences, but overall they're both very different. And I think they both have a huge learning curve. And I think for the possibility of story, we've seen that in Brubaker's Captain America. I think that there's a lot to be said about Bucky trying to both do his own thing and be the Captain America and represent Steve Rogers in the most positive way he can. And I also think, like, Bucky was straight up a badass Captain America. I think he looks dope. His costume's cool. The storylines presented with him were great. And that's not denoting Wilson's Captain America. I think that Falcon was an interesting character, but I think for my taste, I think that Bucky is the successor in my headcanon to Steve Rogers for the mantle of Captain America.
I think the vast majority of people would agree with you, and I'm not saying that I disagree with that. My point would be that that when it comes to in terms of legacy, you're absolutely right. Bucky is in many ways, he's a darker Captain America. He's darker because he was a secret agent for a long time. He was brainwashed, used by the Russians as a secret agent. He's more inclined to kill. He's darker. He's a little bit more hard ass, et cetera, et cetera. And in that sense, he was like that for many years before he got unbrainwashed or whatever. And so he's got a lot in common with Captain America. But what makes Sam Wilson stand out is America has changed, and Sam Wilson and Steve Rogers, they've had very, very different lives. Mm-hmm. They just have, and there's no question about it that it's because of their race. That's part of it. And Marvel Comics has always been about the story outside your window, about the characters outside your window. Agreed. And that's causing some controversy now, because the stories outside our window, guess what? There's a toxic culture war going on right now. There's a lot going on right now that's upsetting a lot of people, where, not two people like you and I, there are equivalents out. There's some people like us who can't have this conversation without having it get, really ugly. And quite frankly, I think Sam Wilson represents a changing America. It is becoming different. It's becoming more diverse, and that makes it a little bit uncomfortable. But here's the thing: just as exciting. These comic books are fun to read. Sam Wilson is a great character. He's also the Falcon. So not only is he Captain America, but he brings his history as the Falcon with it too. And he's an awesome character. And he just brings his own to the character. And well, again, obviously Bucky does too.
Yeah,
I will say though, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, I don't think there's a wrong answer to this question. I really don't. I think that when it comes to the Bat family, I would argue night and day that Dick Grayson is the successor to Batman, where things stand right now. But I don't think that I can say that like I said, objectively, I don't think that Bucky is a better Captain American than Sam, because I think they both represent two very different things that are also distinctly different from what Steve Rogers represented. and both of them kind of trying to find that calm between what they want to and inherently represent to what Steve Rogers represents, just poses a lot of interesting storytelling. You know, I think that it could just be my affection for Bucky through Brubaker's Captain America, because that's the only run of Captain America I've read through and through, and just that's what made me love Cap. Objectively, I don't think Captain America has had, you know, a plethora of Captain America central story arcs that are amazing. So like that kind of being my gateway into Captain America, I might even be a little bit partial. But you know, I like you said, I think that it's really interesting because it Sam Wilson brings into question white America, and I think that is really interesting, having a black Captain America to contradict the early 40s, you know, development of Steve Rogers as this white soldier for the American truth and way, and the American justice, and all these other I guess I don't want to call them propaganda tools because there's merit to some of them, but for, you know, if Sam Wilson were Captain America back in the 40s, it wouldn't fly at all. And that's a pun on him being Falcon, I guess. But I think that it's really interesting, and it poses a lot of questions about Sam Wilson being Captain America, because we exist in, you know, a lot of people would give me flack for saying a post-racial society. I mean, you will always have racists. Racists will never not exist. But generally, I think that the public overview is fairly post-racial. And again, that's me saying this as a white guy. So maybe, you know, someone disagrees, and that's fine. But I think that it's interesting. Like, we have a world where he still faces some sort of adversity for being a black Captain America, but it can happen. Like, we can have a black Captain America, and it says a lot about, you know, the changing of times and where things are going, and how important it is to advocate for equality, whether or not it's a job or whether or not it's somebody totally different being Captain America. We actually just got a new viewer, Alex Grover. Greetings from France. Thanks for joining us, man. It's really cool having somebody coming over from Europe. So, thanks for stopping by. He asked what we're talking about. We're talking about mantles in comic books. We're talking about kind of the sidekicks taking up the positions of their mentors. So like the Robins becoming Batman, who we think is the most well-equipped. And currently we're discussing who should take up the mantle of Captain America between the Winter Soldier and Falcon. But, you know, without going too far off into a side tangent, you have anything else to say about that, Comic Boom?
I would just recommend that people read, there's a Captain America Generations issue. It came at the end of Secret Empire. It's a one-shot, and it's a quick story about present day Sam Wilson Captain America gets transported back in time because of Kobik, and he ends up in World War II helping out Captain America, and then he essentially stays there, and he becomes an old man, and he lives to present day, and then time gets righted again. But it's a story of family, of heroism, of what it is to be a hero. It's just I mean it might sound really cliche, but it's about Captain America. But it's frankly I thought it was the most well-written script by Nick Spencer throughout the entire Secret Empire, and it came right at the end. It's Generations, and you could probably get it on Comixology it's probably for 99 cents or $1, but it's well worth the read. It's very good. It's my favorite Generations issue out of all the Generations issue, which incidentally those Marvel Legacy Generation issues that, you know what I'm talking about, they were all about the legacy characters, and so it's appropriate that people can check out any of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting thing, kind of like going down on this conversation with Captain America, I think that both of the characters represent different parts of Captain America's legacy that are very distinct and different. And I think that, you know, if either one of them were to become the next Captain America, I don't think I'd be upset about it. I think that, you know, again, like most other things, under the hands of a good writer, I think that either one of them can be developed as a solid Captain America. Bucky was an interesting one under Brubaker. And as you said, Sam Wilson was an interesting one under... what's his name? Spencer.
Nick Spencer.
Yeah, Nick Spencer. but they, like I said, they both have a lot to say. The Bucky represents, classic Cold War sentiments were like kind of spinning on its head and becoming a little bit more um, modernized, I suppose, a little bit more rational. And Sam Wilson is the plea of African Americans, in earlier America, or like the mid 20th century, and beforehand, um, kind of getting the pedestal that the white man used to carry. So I think that they both hold a very interesting stake in the legacy of Captain America.
I agree.
But so unless you have anything else to say about Captain
No,
America, or we can move on.
no, we can move on.
Cool. I think the next one, we talked about Batman. There's something to be said about the Superman family. Superman has his surrogate son, Connor Kent, his real son, Jonathan Kent. We have his cousin, Kara Zor-El. And I think, for my money, those are probably the only three that really have a stake in the mantle of Superman.
Yeah, I would agree. There's I guess, yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's also Power Girl, but that's, I guess, the Superman of Earth too. And there's a couple times, even I think in many ways, Lois Lane as an investigative reporter, she's sort of inspired by him, inspired by the legacy of her husband as a reporter. And Lois Lane's going to be getting her own series in the next, I think, in January. Bendis has given her own series, and I think it's I think that basically covers it. When it comes to Superman, he seems to inspire so many, but he doesn't have. It's like it's odd. I never really. They don't. Superman doesn't really have a. We've never really had a Superman and Supergirl series. Like, we have a Batman and Robin. You don't hear of Superman and what? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
he's up with multiple people. I've never really thought of Superman as having a sidekick per se. He clearly has a legacy, but his legacy is very generalized, I find, and it's for the whole world. It's what he stands for, And when I think of Superman's legacy, I'll be blunt. I don't think of a person when I think of Superman's legacy. I think of concepts, and that's what's interesting about Superman.
Yeah.
In my mind, to me, Supergirl is a totally different hero. She just happens to be Superman's cousin. I guess that's the way I've always conceived of it. Superman is more of a concept, and his legacy is more in concept and less in another character. But I don't know, man. Maybe you feel different.
No, and again, it's one of those things where I think that you make a very good point, and I think Superman is eternal not only in his biology and being able to live for extended periods of time, but also in what he represents. But I think that in taking things from the approach that we have been this whole discussion, I think naturally I want to say that Jonathan Kent does, but I think that Kara Zor-El becomes the main super person before John ever does. And I think that in a post Clark Kent Superman world, I think that she learns from him, and I think that she becomes the most receptive, and she kind of becomes the Dick Grayson to John Kent's Damian Wayne, and she teaches him and hones him. Clark Kent has a very ambiguous footing in current DC continuity. We really don't know where the hell he is right now. And this is supposedly going to be dealing with Connor sometime soon. But I think that John, like Damian, will eventually take up the mantle that his father has preserved over the years. But I think, in the same sense that Dick Grayson is the stepping stone for Damian, I think that Kara Zor-El will be the stepping stone for John Kent. I think that Kara, like I said, in a post-Clark Kent world, I think that she will really take on and cling to the ideals of Clark and make things her own, just as Dick Grayson did for Bruce.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't have strong feelings about it, because Superman to me inspires everybody. He inspired the Legion of Superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
He's inspired the Justice League. He's inspiring to Batman.
he's inspired the entire pantheon that is American superhero comics. Without him, no one else would exist. Nobody else's ideals would be the same. He is the superhero. And that's coming from someone who thinks that Batman is potentially the greatest fictional character of all time. Superman is the greatest superhero of all time.
Yeah. And what makes Superman interesting, very fascinating to me, is that it's his, at least the way I conceive of Superman, this isn't the type of guy who, when in his spare time, he's not like Batman where he's going to go out and try to form a new super team called the Outsiders. No, what does Superman do? He does something as Clark Kent. He's an investigative reporter. He does something as the human side of him. He helps a lot of people as Clark Kent. He wants a family. He wants a son. That's what his priorities are, very much human, not superhuman, but human. That's what makes him different. His legacy is his humanity. He doesn't really seem to. He always seems to embrace the larger super meta part of him, almost with a kind of, well, it's his responsibility and that's why he does it. But he doesn't, I don't find him always to be necessarily proactive. He's always reactionary. He's the rescuer. You know, he's the fireman. You know, Batman's like the policeman or the detective. Superman's like the fireman. He rescues you once he doesn't actually go and necessarily prevent any crime. He sort of goes there and prevents it from getting worse. You know what I mean? That's how I see Superman. He sort of shows up, the disaster's already happened, or it's in the process of happening, and he's helping with the natural disaster. And I see sort of, he just does that. He has this thing as a reporter, and I don't see Superman being high on his list to, lead super teams or necessarily have a legacy. He wants a son. He loves his son, and he's just going to teach his son everything he knows. And if John, the jury's still out. Who's to say Jonathan Kent, his son, is even going to want to be a superhero when he gets older? I think that's an assumption.
Well, I think that, like I said before, I think I would sit firm in the broad scope of things. Superman's legacy is superhero comics, and it's every single character, whether or not you want to admit it, from Marvel, from DC, from Valiant, every superhero. That is his legacy, because without him, even in the DC universe, without him, they wouldn't exist, and he stands for something, and he stands for more than truth, justice, in the American way. He stands for being human. You know what I mean? Just the values of being human and loving your fellow man and treating them with the same love that you would your own blood, because in the end, they are inherently your blood too. We all stem from the same thing.
Well, like you said, it's the ultimate legacy. If you can be remembered more for what you stand for, as opposed to who you train to replace you, right. I think it means more. There's an old expression: the true master is the one that creates the most masters, not the one who has the most servants.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to me, Superman is like the master because he inspires more masters. To me, Batman has all these little servants. If I was to build on that analogy, not to say that Dick Grayson can't be great and everything, but I just see Superman is just on another level entirely. He's he's sort of beyond the person. He's right into the ephemeral and into the deep myth.
Yeah, I mean, whether in a more direct standpoint, he inspired Dick Grayson to be Nightwing. You know what I mean? Like, it's not even like...
What story is that? Do you remember the comic book that was in? I remember that story, but I can't remember that.
I want to say it was in Dixon's Nightwing run. I want to say it was one of the... I don't remember.
Was it an annual?
I feel like it was some sort of annual or a special issue. I have all of Dixon's Nightwing, and I have all of Dixon's Robin. Oh, no, his Robin book's Tim Drake anyways. That doesn't matter. Maybe it was a Superman annual, because I don't remember if Superman's impact on Nightwing was strictly a post-crisis thing. I don't know if he had that same level of impact on Nightwing back when Nightwing was...
I thought Superman... I thought Superman's favorite hero was Nightwing, because Nightwing used to be a hero of Kandor, the Bottle
Of
City of
Kandor, yeah,
Kandor.
he
There
was,
was
but
Nightwing and Flamebird, right?
yeah,
There was Nightwing and Flamebird. They were heroes in the Bottle City of Kandor.
yeah. The only thing I don't remember is I don't remember if Superman had the same level of impact pre-Crisis, like when he was Disco Suit Nightwing. I think that was mostly a product of Judas Contract. But I think aside from that, I know in a post-Crisis landscape, Superman Superman was one of the people that influenced Dick Grayson the most to kind of stepping out and being his own man and being his own character in a much more positive light than just his resentment for Bruce Wayne at the moment and his fuck Batman attitude at the time. Uh, but I think that Superman stands for these very transcendental things that are overall reflected on every superhero in the landscape. But I think everybody is naturally a successor to Superman because of that. But I think in the Superman family directly, I think that
It's
again,
Supergirl. Yeah.
I take a very direct approach in saying that in the end, it's Jonathan Kent. Jonathan Kent is being groomed to be the Superman in the same world where, again, where we were talking, Damian Wayne is probably, barring future character development, is probably the most primed to becoming Batman.
Yeah.
But for the foreseeable future, I think it's got to be Kara.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, in a post-Clark Kent landscape, she's really going to cling to Clark's ideals. I think that would be, in a world where, at the time, Dick, in like a post-Final Crisis world, they thought Bruce was dead. So Dick Grayson stepped up and clung to Bruce's teachings, but also made it his own. And I think Kara is very much going to do the same thing. And I think that that'll be the biggest point of maturity and growth for her as a character when she learns to kind of, I don't want to say raise Jonathan Kent, because I think Lois is going to be around. I don't think, if Clark Kent were to quote unquote final crisis and die temporarily or however long, because Clark Kent will never permanently be dead. I think that Kara will play a big sister role for Jonathan.
And a lot of people forget that Kara is actually older than Clark. She's actually older, and she remembers Clark as a baby. Mm-hmm. So it's only because of the way space-time works with the space travel, that she got to Earth, and Clark Kent was, Kal-El was grown to be an adult. And so I think it's interesting that, Kal-El's son, Jonathan, is probably the same age that Kal was when Supergirl last remembers Kal before Krypton exploded. So
I think that'll be really interesting because in Grant Morrison's Batman and Robin run, you really have that juxtaposition of Dick and Damian, in the sense that Damian's a little Bruce, and it's Dick kind of raising a little Bruce the same way Bruce raised a little Dick Grayson.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be a really interesting story point where Kara is like, this is the Kal-El she knew, like this young, I mean, even though, Kal-El was a baby, but that was the Kal-El that she knew of, like just this young, so it's her getting to shape Kal-El like she had always kind of intended to do as an older figure in his family. And I think that would raise a lot of really interesting story between the two of them, if it were to ever be done. But I for that purpose, I would say, again, I agree with you 100%, and I think that overall, Superman's legacy is comic books. It is the superhero pantheon that is comic books, but in a more fine-tuned sense, and in the scope of our conversation so far, the direct legacy of Superman is Kara, and then passed on to John. I don't know where the hell Connor would stand, though. I think that's a pretty valuable question to ask, and I think that maybe we'll get a little bit more insight to that, because, like I said, from what I understand, Bendis has plans for Connor Kent, and I'm kind of excited to see him back, because most of my experience with Superman is Justice League stuff pre-Flashpoint, Flashpoint Justice League, or New 52, and Rebirth Superman. I've read a couple classics like All Star and whatnot, so I don't have a hell of a lot of exposure to Connor Kent. So I don't think I really have a lot to say about Connor and where
Yeah.
he stands.
Well, I can tell you, like Connor Kent was basically created. He's half Lex Luthor, half Superman in terms
Yeah.
of DNA, right? And so I think in that respect, from a narrative standpoint, and the idea of legacy, Connor Kent's a very interesting character insofar as he's sort of a combination of two mortal enemies, and so the fact that he's got some Lex in him and some Superman, he's is interesting. I find him he's I, I always found him kind of a wild card. I didn't know what to make of him, to be honest with you. But he sort of grew on me. I didn't shed a tear when he died. I really didn't care when he died in Infinite Crisis. When Superboy Prime killed him,
Yeah.
I I didn't necessarily. A lot of people claim that was the first time they ever cried when they read a comic book. I I sort of I wasn't really affected by it emotionally. I wasn't a big fan, and I've never been a huge Connor Kent fan, but you know, I don't know. I think he's kind of a redundant character now, but I'm sure that they're going to bring him back. I thought they were going to bring him back maybe at the end of Doomsday Clock. I sort of thought maybe they were going to bring him back at some point with Wally West and everything. So I'm surprised he's not back already. I have a feeling I think Superboy Prime is going to be one of the more. I think in the next big DC events, couple down the road, we're going to have Superboy Prime and Connor Kent come back in all their glory. But that's a digression.
Yeah, I think Superboy Prime, again, without going too far, I think Superboy Prime will have some level of involvement with the Justice League. Whatever happens with Connor Kent, we'll see. From what I understand, I think it was during Man of Steel, where Superman is carrying who we think is Barry, but it was actually Wally. Like, he had red hair. And it spawns out of the events of Doomsday Clock, and the editorial didn't catch it, and that's why he had red hair. So supposedly, even though he's called Barry, the Flash and Man of Steel, was supposed to be Wally. So I think that has an interesting. I think the fact that the Doomsday Clock's been so tremendously delayed will have a big impact on the continuity and whatever happens with Connor Kent. Yeah. I'm interested to see how that plays out because we've already had that one slip up. I have a feeling DC is going to be a little bit more conscious of things. And it also makes me wonder what the original intention for Connor Kent was, because I imagine with this whole Doomsday Clock thing and Bendis taking over Superman, that's probably affected whatever plans they had with Connor Kent. I had always thought that Tynion was going to do something with Connor because he has this big penchant for the 90s characters.
So Tim Drake and Connor Kent were best friends.
Dude,
if they were really good friends, and so I thought that's another reason why you talk about Tynion's detective run. I thought that they mentioned Connor. In fact, Tim didn't remember Connor.
Well, they explicitly show future Connor in that Super Sons of Tomorrow arc too.
But that's right. But in Detective, I thought Tim didn't remember who he was. Right?
He didn't, but he doesn't. But you remember at the end of that Super Sons of Tomorrow, you get a matured Cassie Sandsmark and Bart and Connor that come through that warp. So like they're still in continuity somewhere. I mean, we saw Bart pop out of that little Speed Force hole post Flash War.
Right.
I don't know where the hell Cassie is right now. And Connor,
nobody knows where Cassie is. That's a good point. That's another, I'm not, because that's another legacy character with connections to Zeus and Wonder Woman. We don't know what's going on there. So
I think the next person to be brought back has to be Connor. We've had more pokes at Connor than Cassie. Cassie really only had that one thing. I think that they're probably going to have. It may be a result of Doomsday Clock that Tim remembers Connor Kent, but it may also be, in the same sense that, Wally came back, he, touched his own. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I think that Connor's probably going to be the next member of I guess the Young Justice team or like that Teen Titans team to come back. So we'll see. As the one thing. So my question for you is, seeing as him kind of being the things that make him up are two drastically different things. Do you see his legacy being one of heroism or villainy? Do you think that there's a potential that he could be a villain for John growing up?
You're talking about Connor Kent?
Yes.
Well, I think that I can't see him being a villain. Well, look, that would be a surprise. I think that would be a pretty cool change. That would be a significant turn of events, because he died a hero. He went out at about as heroic as you can get in saving the universe from Superboy Prime at the end of Infinite Crisis of that series. So he was extremely heroic when he went out. And so I can't see Connor being a villain. I find it very, very hard. His whole character arc was always him overcoming his Lex Luthor side. And Lex was always, he always acknowledged his Lex Luthor side, and there was always this idea that, well, Lex was maybe his darker side, but then everyone assumed his brighter side was maybe Superman. But where the complexity came in is that Lex Luthor himself is not necessarily evil. He just really doesn't like metahumans, depending on how you view Lex Luthor. Now, all this has thrown a wrench into it, because now they've really made Lex Luthor evil again in Justice League, in the pages of Justice League, with the doorknob he has and the breaking down of the source wall and what they have. So I don't know. So if they bring Connor Kent back, is he still gonna have the same genetic foundation being Lex Luthor? I don't know. Like I said, that's all in his. I guess your guess is as good as mine at this point.
I mean, he was briefly part of like the New 52 Teen Titans, or like the first time they tried to start that up, and like I was confused as shit. Like I didn't know where the hell he stood at the time. I don't know where the hell he is now, because he exists. He's in actually, yeah. Now that I think about it, Connor isn't even in like Lost in the Time Stream. He exists. Like he's part of the New 52 landscape.
Was he a New 52?
Yeah, he was in that really shitty Teen Titans run. I think it was by Scott Lobdell, with art by Brett Booth. He was a part of that team at some point, and I don't remember much. I mean, it was a very negligible run. There was a lot of crazy stuff.
He wasn't in the pages of Superboy.
No. He was. Wait, what? Superboy, New 52.
The New 52 had a Superboy series, and it was a completely different Superboy. It wasn't Connor. Honestly, it's a headache. It was so badly written. It was a disaster. But no, it was canceled after it went to issue 34, I believe.
It made it that long?
It made it that long. Yeah, it was way too long.
Who was Superboy in that book?
Oh my god, don't even. Honestly, I can't even remember. But he ended up dying at the end. It was a disaster. It was one of the worst. I kid you not. I was on another live stream. A while back, and it's the single worst. My vote for the worst New 52 series was Superboy, hands down, because it was you don't even want to think about it, because it just wasn't Connor Kent. You can just ignore it. Like it was not good.
Yeah, I mean Connor was there during the Teen Titans run, and I specifically remember an annual where he's like on and off again, losing his shit. I don't remember if like the one that was like influencing his mind was like a Croatian or a Martian, but I specifically remember it because he had like this kind of crazy suit, and he had like these weird psionic powers, and it was really strange. Obviously, very forgettable and very negligible to the greater scheme of things. But I remember Connor Kent because, as someone who didn't start reading comics until about 5 years ago, like that was my first exposure to Connor Kent.
Yeah.
So I remember him being there. It was weird. It was really, really weird. So he exists. Like he's in the New 52 somewhere. I wonder if they're gonna pull that like Conrell in the pre-Flashpoint landscape is in the Speed Force, and you got this guy. Maybe they'll do like a Dragon Ball Z fusion, like with pre-New 52 Superman and New 52 Superman. I don't know. Yeah. But like more that I think about it, like he exists. Like he was in the New 52 somewhere to some extent. So we'll see. Um, so do you have any hot pressing legacy characters that you wanted to bring up?
I I do. My one of my favorite, and might be a little bit more of a controversial character, at least to some of the other. I've never picked your brain about her, but Jane Foster Thor. I love Jane Foster Thor. I thought it was I thought she was such a great character, and she was basically her that. Have you? Can I ask? Have you read Jane Foster Thor at all?
Yeah, I read parts of it. Actually, to be honest with you, she was the first Thor I ever read. I read,
Yeah.
so I started reading Marvel back when Original Sin came out.
Yeah.
And so I remember Thor losing his hammer, and I had heard, like, oh, Jason Aaron's the shit. He's doing all this big stuff with Thor. And I was like, well, like, beforehand, I didn't really care about Thor, but it's like, I kind of want to know why he can't pick up the hammer. So I started reading Thor, and I was like, I think that Jane Foster Thor is a great idea, and it might, and again, I might be biased. I think that Thor Odinson is still the Thor. I'm
Yeah.
not taking that away from him, you know. But I think that she was really interesting and a great idea, and she was kind of like what Jim Gordon Batman should have been. You know, like you can acknowledge that it's something totally different, but it's great in its own right. And I
Well,
think
that's why it works. And the best legacy characters, like you can't say, I love Jane Foster Thor. I don't I still love Odinson.
Mhm.
Jane Foster was a great character because in many ways a lot of the inspiration she got, she loved, she in a sense resented the god. She was born sort of, she lost her husband and her son in a car accident. She resented God for taking that away. Her mother died, and her mother told her, Jane, find a God you can believe in. Find a God worthy of you. And then here the Hammer Mjolnir finds her and chooses her, and the only God she ever really believed in was Thor Odinson. So she got inspiration from him, but then even Thor failed to save her son and her husband from a car accident. And despite that lack of faith, she overcame that to find herself worthy to wield something that only a God could. I mean, it's such a hugely inspirational story. It astounds me that I'm very biased on it, but it just astounds me how some people just don't like the story, because I just love it. I think it's a hero's journey of a story, and it's one of the great legacy arcs for a character. And of course she dies, and then you sort of resurrected at the end, and she's no longer Thor, but she's potentially there to come back to be Thor if called upon. So it's good.
I think that one of the really interesting things about Jane Foster being Thor is that ultimately her purpose for being Thor is opposite to Odinson. Odinson does it as a rite of passage, where she does it, and he does it in the beginning for the glory, partly, and for her, like, it's killing her. It literally was killing her. You know what I mean? So I think that it's a good way to juxtapose the character of Odinson, the characters of Odinson and Jane Foster, and how they approach the mantle of Thor from the get-go. Albeit Thor had a lot of time to develop, she was a more developed character from the beginning, from the get-go, as Thor. And ultimately, I think she was a great character. And because, most people don't think about how cyclical comics is. You know what I mean? Like, Bruce Wayne's died, Clark Kent's died, Steve Rogers has died, Logan has died, Wolverine, Barry Allen's died. Literally every big character in comics has died at some point. So, like, the fact that people kind of freaked out about her being Thor, it's like, you're going to get Odinson back eventually. Like, yeah, it might take 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, but you're going to get him back. The comics are an industry, specifically superhero comics are an industry that have existed for 80 years. And so I think that keeping that in mind and just kind of reading the stories to enjoy them and to soak in something different than what you're used to, but that is also told on a par level of quality is great. I think that her being Thor and her time as Thor was awesome. She was technically besides, the bit I read in Original Sin, she was the first real Thor that I ever read. And again, I might be biased because of that. But I think that, like I said, to contrast that, like I still like Odinson more than I like Jane Foster.
Yeah.
No question. I mean, like when I read like that Unworthy Thor series, and I was like, this is great. I love this. But at the same time, I think Jane Foster's Thor, there's no, like you can't really talk down to that. I think that it has its place. It's great. It was written well. Great art. The development that caused for Odinson too, not only for Jane Foster but for Odinson, is great. That I think that I think that I don't even want to say I think that I know that Jason Aaron's Thor will go down as one of the greatest runs overall in Thor's history. I think it's up there with Walter and Louise Simonson's run on Thor.
Yeah, I believe it is too. I won't pretend to have read. I read a little bit of Simonson's run. I'm still in the process of reading it in Comixology, but I've no doubt that it will. It has a strong place in my heart. The legacy of Thor. I mean, even in the comic books. I mean, he's 1,500 years old. I think he's 1,500 years old in the comics as well as in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's the same, but I stand to be corrected on that. I'm not a Marvel zombie, but the initial opening arc, the first arc of Jason Aaron's Thor was when he fought God,
the God Butcher,
Thor, the God Butcher.
God Butcher, yeah.
And there was he met his future self. There was future Thor, present Thor, and so the idea of legacy was very, very prevalent through there. And then there was Jane Foster, the second act, carrying on the legacy of Thor. Mm-hmm. And then even the debate in the comic collecting community, a lot of people on live streams like you and I were, so many complaining that, Thor isn't, you can't just replace Odinson. Odinson is Thor. Thor's not about the hammer. So even what makes Thor so fascinating is when we talk about Thor's legacy, do we talk about the legacy of his hammer? Or are we talking about the legacy of Odinson? Because that's a legitimate question, because Thor is different things to different people. Is Thor the hammer or is Thor the character?
Well, I mean, it's like, I mean, again, like I hate to be a broken record, but it's like the same thing with Batman. Dick Grayson has been Batman, but when you say Batman, you inherently think of Bruce Wayne. And I think it's very much the same thing, that, the person to put on the cowl or the person to wield the hammer is ultimately that thing. They are Thor, they are Batman. But when you say Thor, you think Odinson. And if you look at the I guess the binding on the hammer, it says he who is pure of heart or whatever,
or
shall she who is worthy will receive the powers of Thor. So Thor is as much a mantle or a construct, as it is Odinson. Yes, that is his name. His name is Thor Odinson, but like, it's hard because there's a lot of like semantics with nomenclature when it comes to Thor, because Odinson's name is Thor. But I think the mantle of Thor as a hero is not tied down to Odinson. I think Jane Foster was just as much a Thor as Dick Grayson was a Batman.
Yeah. So what about you? What character stands out for you?
This next one I think is a huge one that I can't pass up, and shout out to Joseph's Books. It's probably his favorite family in comics, and it's the Flash. I think that the Flash family is great and broad, and there's a lot of that's probably the second biggest family in comics. Most people don't think about that. You know what I mean? Especially when you go to like the more external characters like Max Mercury and guys like that. But I think that it's awesome because they all, we had a conversation last time about faith and how the thing that ties them together throughout Speed Force is the concept of love being the most powerful force in the universe, not the Speed Force, but love. And that persisting throughout space and time and whatever kind of landscape you want to put that in. But I think as a character, speaking in a successor mindset, I gotta be a zombie and say it's got to be Wally West. Wally West is the natural successor to Barry Allen. He is the one that's most in tune with the Speed Force. A lot of people would probably think that Bart is the eventual successor because he has Allen blood in him. He was pretty much born with access to the Speed Force. But I think that there is an exception to what I was saying about Damien and John eventually leading up and becoming the things by which they've been trained to do. I don't think it's Bart. I think it's Wally. It's Wally 100% of the way. I don't think Wally is the stepping stone. I think Wally is the Flash. And he's even, and I don't even want to say after Barry, because even with Barry alive right now, he's still a Flash. He is there. There is no adjective. There is no adverb. There's no other way to describe him in anything. He's not Kid Flash. He's not Impulse. He is Flash. Yeah. Right now in the comic book.
I've always had an affinity for Wally West. I remember collecting Crisis on Crisis, the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I remember the first time I ever cried when I read a comic was when Supergirl died. I think it was the following issue, in issue 8, when Flash died. It didn't bother me in the slightest. When Barry Allen died, I didn't care. I was collecting Flash at the time. I got to tell you, that was one boring comic. That was for me. But when Man of Steel came out, John Byrne's Superman, fantastic. I loved it. And then Wally West came out. He took up Barry Allen's mantle, and I for years I collected Wally West Flash, and I got all of them, and I love the issue, and I love you got to know him, develop his relationship with Linda Park, and they would have then I love Mark Waid's run, and then there was Grant Morrison had a run, and these are fantastic issues, and they really developed Wally West. Wally West genuinely replaced Barry Allen, and a lot of people, yourself included, by the sounds of things, I mean, Wally West was Flash for an entire generation of comic readers, and it was only because Jeff Johns came along and he had he rebirthed. I mean, he sort of undid the damage that of Hal Jordan Parallax, and he sort of did a good job in Green Lantern or Green Lantern Rebirth, that he did the same thing with Flash and brought back Barry Allen. I didn't want Barry Allen to be brought back at all. I still think Wally West is a better character. But getting into the idea of legacy, you're absolutely right. I think Wally West has Wally West has something that better even than Barry Allen had, except he's even got kids. Wally West has twins. He's got a wife who loves him, and he's got kids that ground him, and he's a great father. And because I love that legacy so much, and I'm biased, and I'm an older first-time father, I got a bias, and I kind of don't like the fact of how if Wally West is going to be put through the ringer in the Heroes in Crisis. I don't like what they're doing with Wally West. I don't like Out of Flash War. I'm a little disappointed with how they've sort of put him through the ringer like that, but I hope he gets his family back and his twins back. I want him to be happy. I know it's comic books, but I want a happy ending for Wally West because I think he deserves it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I don't want to, discuss my trepidations of Heroes in Crisis, because I think that's a whole nother, 40-minute conversation about how paranoid I am to what that's going to be doing. But I agree. I think that Wally West is at his best when he's with his family, and I think that the best stories are the ones where the heroes learn the most. And I think as a father is where Wally learns, because, alone he's a great character because he's so different from Barry in the sense that he wants very much to be Barry, but inherently is not Barry. And he has this connection to the Speed Force that is strictly more spiritual than it is scientific or knowledge. And I think that, the thing that made him grow up to really become the Flash is once he realized that he had a greater connection to the Speed Force than Barry and decided to not let the memory of Barry hold him back. But B, when he kind of had to take that parental role and execute the things that Barry Allen did with him as a big brother or a father figure with his own kids. That's when he learned the most. That's when he really came into his own as, I guess, I have this pedestal of the original 7 members of the Justice League, and that they are the pinnacle of superheroes, and I think that once Wally had his kid, that's where he really stood strong and pushed past Barry. Not when, they had pretty much openly said that he is the fastest man alive. It's when he had his kids. And whereas a character, he had matured into the father figure that Barry was for him, but he also had that spiritual connection. So he was kind of like this interwork, or this melded combination of Barry Allen's good qualities and the things that made him so lovable as his own character. So I think that, and again, Wally, him and Dick Grayson, I think, really stand out of all the legacy characters in comics as the ones that are most suited to take over for their mentors. I mean, not only are they best friends, but they are so inherently different from their mentors, but they've retained and learned so much from them that they are two of the greatest products that the original pantheon of DC heroes have ever turned out.
I agree. I agree. Wally West is he's kick-ass. And I got to give a shout out to Bart Allen. If you ever have a chance to pick up in dollar bins any issue of Young Justice with Bart Allen and the team, that's especially the run written by Mark Waid on Young Justice. That's some of the funniest written comics you'll ever read. It's great stuff. The youngsters, Bart Allen and the younger. It's great stuff. Anyways, I'm partial to Bart Allen too. I like him as Impulse. Bart Allen's great as Impulse.
Yeah.
To me, Flash hit a low point when they aged Bart Allen up and made him the Flash for a period of time. That was a disaster.
Yeah.
But that's how they messed with the legacy. That was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that's probably an example, which a topic for another day, of legacy gone wrong. But
yeah. Anyway. Do you think that Bart Allen's place in comic books is to become Kid Flash, or do you think that and here's my opinion, I think that he should grow the name Impulse into its own thing. I think that he should always be Impulse. I don't think that he graduates to another mantle. I think that he finds himself, within his role as Impulse and makes that his legacy, apart from just being the Flash.
I think you're right. And I think you make a very, very good point. And I think we should address that right now. And that is that some of these characters might be inspired by the legacy, whether of Batman or Flash or whatever. But to go back to Nightwing, to me, Nightwing is just cooler than Batman in many ways. I love Nightwing being... I remember Batman complimenting Dick Grayson as Nightwing actually taming and Bloodhaven. Bloodhaven was a city that arguably was worse than Gotham City.
Yeah.
And Dick Grayson went there when he left Gotham, and he tamed that city, and he fought Blockbuster was the head of the mafia there, and he took down Blockbuster. He kicked some ass, and he made it his own. And the criminal element feared Nightwing. They didn't fear Batman.
Mm-hmm.
It was Nightwing. And like you said, making owning your own legacy. I mean, it's like I said before, the best masters create the best masters, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to have a clone of Batman in every city. I mean, so yeah, I like the idea of Impulse staying Impulse, and each, Supergirl staying Supergirl, Nightwing being Nightwing. And let's face it, they're never gonna age anyway, right?
Yeah.
You and I are we're gonna die of old age, and Nightwing is still gonna exist, and Supergirl's still gonna exist.
Yeah.
Jonathan Kent's still gonna be 13 years old. So
yeah. Well,
none of that's gonna change.
And I think that's a major topic to be said about legacy in comics, is that I feel like there's always this inherent sense that they have to move up to the pedestal at which their mentor stood on, where I think that there's a lot of value in that and passing the torch. I think that characters like Impulse, their place is to really expand and own their own legacy and elevate, in his example, the role of Impulse to his own status. I think it's right for Wally to become the Flash. And that's not to say that he can't own his own legacy as Kid Flash, but there's something about, the original protege of the Flash spiritually taking up the mantle of his mentor and being a better Flash than he was. And I think that there's the same to be said about Dick Grayson, and that's inherently why I don't think Tim Drake will ever or should ever be Batman. I think that Tim Drake needs to own his own legacy and be his own thing. That is still, again, influenced by Batman and is still, cohesive with the family. But like characters like that, again, that third generation where you have Impulse and Dick and those characters and maybe even Cassie Sandsmark, and I'm sorry, not Dick, Tim, basically the Young Justice Squad. I think they need to own their own legacy. They are not I think it's the role of their predecessors, the second generation of DC Comics and the second generation of comics in general, to succeed their mentors. But I think it's the role of the third generation to take their legacy and elevate their legacy that they're creating and not diverge entirely from the influence of their mentors, but they to set themselves on a ground, somewhere near to or equal to that of their mentors in their own right.
Yeah. No, good points. Good points. I suppose there's one other one that we could touch upon because it's a major character, and it's kind of interesting, and that's Spider-Man. Spider-Man's interesting because I've never really thought of Spider-Man as having a legacy character, and yet when I think about it, he did have Ben Reilly as a clone there, and Scarlet Spider, and of course there's the Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon, and there's a multiverse of Spider-Man, but the multiverse is a cheat because it's not like the multiverse was necessarily inspired by one, you know what I mean, like one Peter Parker. It's a separate universe, so it doesn't really count. To me, what I find interesting about legacy in the context of Spider-Man is that I find in many ways the legacy of Spider-Man is actually the legacy of his Uncle Ben. So,
that's a good point.
And that's what's interesting. And the Marvel Comics always seems to keep Peter Parker. They have a schizophrenic relationship. They keep Peter Parker young, and yet they draw him old, and yet they want to keep him a teenager.
Yeah.
And yet they kind of portray him like an adult whenever he wants to be with Mary Jane, and then they make him a teenager sometimes. They can't really make up their mind how they want to approach Peter Parker, and so it's hard for him to be a legacy character and have other characters inspired by him when they're trying to keep him a young teenager. Just a quick point. I don't like the idea of Peter Parker having Tony Stark as a mentor. I've always been against that. I have always viewed Peter Parker as being one of the first heroes. He should be the oldest in the Marvel Universe, or one of the first on the scene and the most experienced. This is a topic for another day, but I personally believe that Peter Parker has more experience than Captain America on the timeline, because my theory is by the time they unfroze Captain America's had 5 years tops of fighting experience. By the time they unfroze Captain America, Peter Parker's been Spider-Man for 6 or 7 years, and by the time he's 25, he's had 10 years experience before Captain America's even on the scene. I think Peter Parker's a tactical and strategic genius, and I think he's one of the smartest in the Marvel universe. But anyways, sorry.
No. You raised a lot of really good points there. I think that the reason that Marvel hasn't pursued that mindset is because Peter Parker's appeal is, and was from the beginning, was to be a Robin without a Batman. He was this younger character that had a lot to learn, that really didn't have.
That's a good point.
And he lost his Batman. Uncle Ben, for all intents and purposes, was his role model, was his Batman. But without losing his role model, he would never have become Spider-Man, or the Spider-Man that we know and love, for that matter. So I think that what you have to say is really interesting, and I think that'd be a fucking awesome Elseworlds type of story where Peter Parker is actually like one of the more experienced things. I think that the significance in Peter is that they play on his youth as inexperience. And I think that that's a common thing that, you know, we look at in society, is that, you know, no matter how intelligent a younger person can be, it's usually, you know, their voice in society is usually kind of muffled by, you know, experience by way of age, by their elders. And I think that Peter, you know, you know, I was originally going to say that I think that out of all the Spider characters, that Miles is his natural successor. But you bring up a good point in saying that ultimately this is Uncle Ben's legacy more than it is Peter Parker's. You know, Peter Parker is the mechanism, or Peter Parker is the mechanism by which Uncle Ben's will is carried out. I think in a very direct fashion, Miles Morales is the natural successor to Peter. It's been done in the Ultimate Universe, and I think it's a fucking shame that Marvel won't just let Miles be Spider-Man, because he kind of deserves it.
Yeah,
that's why I don't love that's why I don't love the fact that they brought him in from the Ultimate Universe. It's like, okay, so like, why do we need him? We have Peter Parker, and you're not doing anything valuable with Miles. So like, I think that if you were to bring him into the universe, you don't let him be Spider-Man. You let him make his own mantle. You know what I mean? Like Dick Grayson did as Nightwing. I think you know what I mean? You'd have to do something like that. But otherwise, you know, if you want him to carry over the mantle of Spider-Man, he succeeded Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe, and they should have left it that way.
Yeah, I think Marvel, I think, wants to. It's all part of their inclusivity. They're well-intentioned. Marvel. They want. I think they just wanted to include Miles and all their diverse different characters under one banner and one universe to sort of, you know, create a sense of diversity and inclusiveness for the big picture. And I respect that. But I agree with you, because I love the idea in the DC universe of Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3.
Yeah.
And having having those different things to play with. And so I kind of like sometimes giving a great hero like Miles, give him his own world to shape and his own legacy to build, free and unencumbered by, you know, perhaps the more classic characters. But
yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think it's really demeaning what they've done with him, because they, you know, it's kind of like what they did with I had a comparison in my head, but I can't remember. But like when they brought him in and made him interact with the champions, like, he's a teenager, he's going to interact with the teenagers and be a teenager, but like, he's already been Spider-Man in the comics for the better half of a decade.
Yeah.
Via Ultimate Spider-Man, he's been his own Spider-Man. So like, why are you going to demean him and make him play around with the inexperienced champions? You know what I mean? I think they all have a place. You know, the champions, in particular, the newer version under Mark Waid. But like, I think that he's beyond that. I think that that's way beneath Miles Morales as a character. And I think that for the most part, like, you know, even though younger, he is the Dick Grayson of the Marvel universe for all intents and purposes. He's been, you know, he's taken over this role he's made entirely his own for years. So why are you going to demean him and make him Robin Spider-Man? He's not Robin Spider-Man. He's Spider-Man. And that's coming from I haven't read all of Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man. I've read parts of it, but I think even from that, I feel like it's a damn shame that Marvel's just not letting him be his own thing. That they're just making him this younger Spider-Man to play around with, so that they can have a Teen Titans equivalent. Like, if you're gonna do that, just do the goddamn Young Avengers, and let Miles be the character that he's been developed for. You know, and that the Miles Morales is one of Bendis' biggest contributions to Marvel, for sure too.
I agree. I agree with you. If it wasn't for the fact that, you know, I'm too damn old to be reading comics. I say that sarcastically. It's natural for me, because I love these characters. There's a part of me that I naturally want them to grow old with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like I'm pushing 50 years old, so you know what? I would love a Dark Knight version, a sort of a Dark Knight Returns for Spider-Man. I would love that. I would love a story of a 45-year-old Peter Parker, where he's still a wisecracker, but he's he's old and he's ridiculously experienced, and he's still in fantastic shape. And he's and Tony Stark is, if you follow the math and the age, at some point Peter Parker is going to be the go-to guy for the Marvel universe. I think he should be already, but you get my point. Like, I am astonished by the lack of thinking outside the box that Marvel has with Spider-Man. I think he's their most popular character, and I think overall, I think Marvel's done a terrible job with him. And all they can come up with is Spider-Geddon. Like, I don't know. Like, it just seems to me that there's so many great stories still to tell with the timeline with Peter Parker, and I'm astonished. I guess I'm just gonna have to write it myself, but.
I'm trying to think of what story. Oh, Spider-Man Reign. They kind of did that in Spider-Man Reign, where he's kind of like this older, disillusioned, like schizophrenic Peter Parker.
Yeah, no, I read that. That's right. Have they done it? Yes. They just haven't done it. Look, obviously, I have a much higher opinion of Peter Parker's abilities and his genius than most. This is a guy who at maybe 16, 17 years old was defeating the Sinister Six out of his bedroom because he'd get defeated by them, and he'd go into his bedroom and he'd figure out how to change some part of his wardrobe, and then go and fight and avoid being electrocuted, and then defeat them, and then go to school the next day. And he didn't do that with the help of the Avengers and the Wasp and the Vision and the X-Men. And he didn't bitch, whine, and complain about their place in the world like all the X-Men do. Oh, woeful me, I'm discriminated against, blah, 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 blah. Peter Parker sucked it up, and he got the job done, and he went to school, because great power brings great responsibility. And then what frustrates me, and yes, I'm on a soapbox right now, is that Marvel turns around and basically insults Peter Parker, just like they're doing now with Miles Morales, and basically relegating him to say, oh yeah, he looks up to Tony Stark. Yeah. You're never going to convince me that Peter Parker looks up to Tony Stark. Tony Stark is a narcissistic jerk. Peter Parker is just as intelligent as Tony Stark. He's better raised than Tony Stark. He's got better fighting skills than Tony Stark. I mean, I could go on and on. Anyways, I'm
No, don't apologize, man. That was a really just the way you approach that, I think, is really interesting. And there's a lot to be said about, where the public view Peter Parker, and how that seems to be more important to Marvel than how the fans view Peter Parker, like the real fans. I mean, ultimately, them breaking up Peter's marriage is a product of that with Mary Jane, and from what I understand, a lot of old, like, longtime Spider-Man fans were fucking fumed. Like, they were so pissed. I've never met an old-time Spider-Man fan that was glad that Peter Parker's marriage was broken up.
Well, I didn't like it. I was not a fan of it myself. I was definitely not a fan of it. I still have. Well, it's in one of my frames back, which maybe I'll show it sometime. I mean, I got the Peter Parker wedding issue, the two issues framed side by side when Peter Parker and Mary Jane got married. So I'm a huge fan of that marriage, and I'm really glad that Nick Spencer's got them back together in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. So I really like what Nick Spencer's doing with Spider-Man. And I like to think that Nick Spencer's making up for, if people didn't like his Captain America run, I think they're liking his Amazing Spider-Man run a little bit better, because he's bringing back that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot of up and down things about his Amazing Spider-Man right now, but now at least it seems like he's overall trying to be respectful of the legacy of Spider-Man and what previous creators had done. It's tough for me to say too, because my first exposure to Spider-Man was Superior. That was my first Spider-Man story. I didn't give a shit about Spider-Man before Superior. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I went back and read like some earlier Dan Slott Big Time. And then, after Peter came back, it all became a shit show. And I think, there's something to be said where someone who started reading Spider-Man with Dan Slott's Spider-Man realized that Dan Slott fucked Spider-Man royally. But like, overall, just kind of closing out the conversation on Spider-Man and his legacy, I think that we really, as someone who's only mostly read a younger Spider-Man, I want a married Spider-Man. That's like I you know what I mean? Like even again as
Yeah.
somebody who wasn't reading Spider-Man back when he was a married Spider-Man, I want that just as much as I want a married Wally West with kids because it shows progression in these characters and I know that like there's this huge sliding time scale on where, their time relates with our time. But like, it's always a little bit rewarding to see a character develop in those ways. Like, at the beginning of Rebirth when they were like, Damien's 13 now. I was like, cool. Like in the 10 years that Damien's existed, he's aged 3. He's aged 3 years since we first met
Yeah.
Damien. We've
Yeah.
seen a progression of his character throughout time. And we got Dick Grayson becoming Nightwing. And I think it's only natural for Peter Parker to do this. You can't keep, like, especially in a world, for Marvel where they have never had a big reboot. They've never reset continuity. And the fact that, like, you don't even have that excuse to leave Peter Parker and let him be happy with a family is kind of atrocious. Like, yes, I'm not saying that it's a good thing what DC did to Wally West, but like at least there's some sort of excuse behind it because they've rebooted their universe, completely like 2 or 3 times. But Marvel never has, so what the fuck's your excuse?
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I agree. But I'm reminded of something. I remember I had the privilege of meeting Mark Waid one time at the Calgary Comic Con. It was in 2000. I think it was in 2006,
Mhm.
and he's just a guy. He's a great guy. He knows a lot about comics, and I know that he's had some issues of lately, in the last few years being on Twitter, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding him. But I mean,
Mhm.
they say what you will about Mark Waid. He's a great writer. And he knows a lot about
Yeah,
comics, and he said something that I'll never forget. He goes, he said every generation deserves to have comic books written for them,
I agree.
and I always think of that when I think of my own selfish bias about what I want, even my bias here about what I want to see in Spider-Man. And
Yeah,
I have every right to have my own opinion, of course. I know that, but
yeah.
I would much rather have it if I would much rather have Spider-Man, Marvel continue to do what they do to invite more people to read comics. If they got to keep Spider-Man perpetually a teenager and it attracts more readership and it makes billion-dollar entertaining movies that we're watching, I'm all for that. You know,
See,
I
I,
just
I think there's a way to balance it, and I think the line wide DC Rebirth is one of the biggest, you know, um, examples of that. We've got the legacy of the characters that we know and love, but we also got progression. We also realize that like things are moving forward. For me as a fan, like I said, Bruce Wayne will forever be my favorite character in comics. But if we ever get to a world where Damian naturally becomes Batman, I'm not going to be mad because it's storytelling. You know what I mean? Just because,
yeah,
for example, in the Harry Potter books, just because Harry Potter grew old and the story isn't about him anymore doesn't mean I don't love Harry Potter as a character. It's just storytelling. You know what I mean? And comics just happen to, because a, they've withstood a long test of time, and b, because they're a periodical source of storytelling, they haven't had an end. There is no end to comic books, and I think that
yeah,
even putting a temporary stamp on a character for the time being, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, a, because
yeah,
at this state in comics we know comics are cyclical and we'll get them back, but B, I
yeah.
don't think there's anything wrong with exploring new characters. It's shown in,
Well,
and again, in a lot of novels and a lot of books. We
well,
got
I think that though you raise a good point about the timeline because that makes it more difficult for them to establish legacy characters when their characters don't age. And of
mhm,
course, they've run into that problem with Batman. I mean, we might love the Batman legacy characters, but let's be blunt, it doesn't quite jive the numbers. Try to make sense of when Dick Grayson was Robin, then Tim Drake was Robin. I mean, really, in order to squeeze all those Robins in, I mean, I think each of them had to have been Robin for about 10 minutes. I mean, to make the joke, but yeah, you got to do that. Obviously, you got to stretch. You got to sort of always allow for a certain amount of you got to stretch believability in order to make the idea of legacy work.
yeah,
That's why I think in many ways the characters like Superman work so well is because the legacy isn't just about the character or timeline. It's about the concept.
Yeah.
And but
Well, I mean, it's with those big names, with the bigger characters and like the original holders of superhero mantles, Batman in particular, I had always seen it as either, we live in a world where either Bruce dies or he eventually comes to grips as a character and develops and decides that it's time for him to have a personal life. Where they were going with Tom King's Batman, if he were to settle down where we're at in continuity right now, I don't think that would have, like, to settle down and to walk away from Batman, I don't think it would have been time. But if in an ideal world where Bruce Wayne doesn't die and he decides to step down as Batman, I think that he's in a relationship with Selina. He's Batman well into his late 40s, maybe even early 50s, and he realizes that it's time for him to pass the mantle on to his successor, and it's time for maybe not even that long, but I think he comes to realize he's laid the foundation for Batman to exist forever. Batman is eternal, not to play on the new 52.
Your Batman Annual 2, I thought was a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Whatever issues I might have with Tom King in some present issues, the fact is Batman Annual 2 is fantastic. To me, it was a great standalone issue, and to me it represents what you just finished talking about, this idea of a future Batman or a potential future Bruce Wayne who gives up the mantle but still has this legacy, this rich legacy, and as he's dying on the bed and that final "I love you" to Selina, surrounded by his legacy.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what we're talking about.
I mean, if I've ever come close to crying in a comic, that probably would have been it. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was feeling all sorts of things when that happened. And I think that's the beauty of Batman, that ultimately, like, as much, and a little bit of a side tangent, as much as he is a hard ass, like, he loves his family. He loves his family. And the books that piss me off are the ones where, like, his reason for leaving these people in the dark is because he thinks they're not capable. I think the reason he leaves his family in the dark is because he loves them, and that if anybody is going to die or get hurt, he wants it to be him. And I think that, he, again, was the first real character to start expanding, his circle in comic books. And, my favorite Batman is the unknowingly great father, where, like, he's making mistakes along the way, no question, because he, but, like, I think that my ideal Bruce Wayne is one that doesn't ignore the fact that he's raising these kids, and that and I think that Alfred is, like, the perfect grandfather to be like, like, Bruce fucks up, he's like, Bruce, cut the shit. You know what I mean? And I think that, as a little, somewhat related side tangent, I think Alfred is as important to the legacy of Batman as Bruce Wayne is, because without Batman, without Alfred, Batman wouldn't exist. Batman would be dead, hundreds of thousands of times over. But, like, the family wouldn't exist. Alfred created the dynamic of the family. And I know, like, again, I'm going off into a little side tangent, but I think that, like, the legacy of characters is not only in their successor in the role, but it's the mentality and the symbols and the concepts that they represent. You know what I mean? I think Alfred is almost as much of Batman, or, like, the concept of Batman, as Bruce Wayne is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you raise a good point, and if you juxtapose Alfred to Uncle Ben, the differences are very interesting, because Alfred almost developed young Bruce's Wayne obsession to avenge his parents, but he helped channel it in a positive way. Absolutely. That it didn't become, that he never went all the way to the dark side. He was sort of like, Batman is always like that perfect combination of Sith and Jedi, but he's just got he's got a little bit more Jedi than Sith. Batman.
Well, I mean, but without Alfred, he wouldn't be, the Jedi. Alfred, I think, and we, eventually we'll probably have a conversation about the greatest supporting characters in comic books. I think, not to like bar off into a huge conversation, I think Alfred is the most important supporting character in comic books. And I will argue that to anybody. Anybody. They could say anything, and I will say that Alfred is the most important supporting character in comic books. And as a little site for those watching, at the end of Scott Snyder's All-Star Batman, he does this story called The First Ally. And
Yes.
it, in large part, has a lot to do with the relationship between Bruce and Alfred. And I don't think I 100% loved the story or the villain. I loved seeing Bruce and Alfred's dynamic as father and son.
Okay.
Because as much as you want to say that Bruce died and lost his parents, Alfred, to me, I think that, and that's, again, this ties into my favorite part about Batman issue 50, and one of the parts that I find most redeeming about it is that in every sense of the word, Alfred is a father to Bruce Wayne, more than Thomas Wayne was, ever. No questions asked, because Alfred was there for Bruce during the most trying times in his life. And the moments where I want to smack Bruce the most are the ones where he's younger and he doesn't quite understand, what Alfred does for him. And I think understanding, in their old age that Alfred is as much part of the mantle of Batman as Bruce Wayne is crucial.
Yeah, no, it's true. And well, that was I even like on a more darker note, it's interesting that even in the pages of Metal, just how dark Batman became.
Yep.
When
The murder machine.
Alfred is killed. I mean, there's always that he's such an important part. And it's no coincidence that even in a divisive run like Tom King has, one of the things that's been praised, I mean, the relationship, some of his best scenes, in fact, probably the top 10 Tom King scenes, at least probably a lot of them involve Alfred.
Yeah.
I mean, when writers, when they get Alfred right, I mean, he's what grounds Batman. Even in the movies, it's the same thing in the Batman movies. I mean, the casting of Alfred is absolutely crucial.
I agree.
It's that foil. It's that grounding. You gotta take this dark, crazy, psychotic person. You gotta ground him in a form of humanity. I mean, how can we forget Michael Caine's words as Alfred in Dark Knight Returns? Talking about the Joker. It was Alfred that encapsulated why the Joker was so evil. It's because some men just like to watch the world burn.
Yeah. Well, Alfred is the perspective that Bruce should be seeing things from. That, in the grand scheme of things, Alfred is the framing device for everything in Batman's universe, to me.
Yeah.
But we've had we hit a really solid side tangent, and I think that that'll be a really good way to maybe discuss supporting characters in comic books. But just kind of closing off the conversation, because we've been going at it for over 2 hours now.
Yeah.
For those of you watching, there's no way we could hit every major character and their legacy in this conversation, because we'd be here for another 5 hours. There's a lot to be said about the legacy in comics, and whether it be from the Golden Age characters, the original generation, to the second, and to third, and to so on. Many characters have left their legacy, and I think that we highlighted, and I don't think it's to say that all the ones we highlighted were more important than others. Certainly, I think that discussing Batman was one of the biggest ones, just because of his contribution to opening his circle, and establishing such a wide legacy of characters under his influence, and again under Superman being the first superhero in American comic books. But there are plenty of characters out there, and for if we missed any characters, let us know in the comments, or hit one of us up on Twitter and just be like, hey, I think this character, the legacy that this character pertains to their mentor or whatever, is important, and I think that that's something to be discussed. Do it up, because we definitely missed some stuff, because both of us tend to really go off when we're passionate and hit the soapbox a little bit. But
I want to give a shout out to two legacy characters. Just a quick shout out. I'm not going to say much.
Sure.
I think the ones with the most potential. I love Grail. Darkseid's daughter, Grail. I think she's a legacy character, like a villain. She's got so much potential. I love Grail. I hope they really develop her, because I think Darkseid's a little bit. He's being underdeveloped right now. He should be like Thanos. I think Grail's underdeveloped. I also really like Scandal Savage, the daughter of Vandal Savage. I think she should be stepping up to the plate now that she never got along with her father. She never loved him very much. He was an immortal jerk, but I think she should be stepping up to the plate, and she's sort of an anti-hero. And finally, I love Laura Kinney, X-23, Wolverine. I quite enjoy her.
That was one of the ones that I think if we had more time, that would have been a really good discussion. Laura Kinney.
Yeah.
But again, we did miss a lot of great characters, and unfortunately, there's only so much time in the day. But I think we hit some of the bigger ones that really needed to be mentioned, that were kind of like the stepping ground for characters even developing a mantle to be passed on to. So at the end of the day, thank you, ComicBoom, for again coming on and help generating this really great conversation about the mantle of comic books. And I think that whether or not we agreed on everything, I think that we both were able to bring validity to different standpoints, and that's the glory of being able to discuss comics and being able to have our opposing opinions. But, I see a lot of where you're coming from, and I think to some degree, it's the same with you in regards to my opinions. We see where we're coming from, and there's a way to respect that. But I think that, in some ways, you brought up a lot of good points that opened my eyes to concepts that I didn't consider initially, especially with Peter Parker's legacy ultimately stemming from Uncle Ben's legacy. So, man, thank you again for coming on and generating some great conversation.
Thank you. And I just want to say to people out there, a really great book on the power of legacy and how to attain, about saying something about immortality and legacy, even in the face of losing one's mind with Alzheimer's. Read God Country, Donny Cates' God Country. I'm going to be reviewing this. I don't want to say much. I don't want to spoil it. I'll give spoilers in my review. But this is a really good, and this talks about legacy too. And how do you obtain legacy? How do you obtain immortality and yet be mortal? I think it has some very interesting things to say about that. So check out Donny Cates' God Country.
Yeah, not to mention it's an image trade, so it's pretty cheap to pick up.
It is. It's cheap, and Canadian here. It's $16.99 US. So most people watching are Americans, so that's a pretty good price.
Yeah. So besides that, what else do you have on the back burner, man? Like, what's coming up for you? Besides, you have your weekly or your monthly, bi-weekly, I guess, Wonder Woman reviews and such. What else?
Actually, this week was a slow week for me because I didn't really get. A lot of it was annuals, and a lot of what I normally get, I didn't really. I probably won't be necessarily reviewing a lot this week. I might even review Venom. Scarlet is a series from Brian Bendis. I might review that. I don't know. This week I might. I'm not really sure. I think I might take a break this week a little bit. I'm gonna be putting up a review of God Country, but beyond that, I think I'm gonna work on thumbnails for next week. I have to admit, I kind of like, as a YouTube reviewer, I like the 5th week. Sometimes I take a break because it's the annuals, and I don't always review the annuals, and I kind of like the break myself because you and I know with yourself, Dark Knight, and myself, we obviously we don't make a living doing this. We have lives, and sometimes it's hard to find time to do this. So sometimes I don't mind having a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
What about yourself? What do you got coming
up? So I've had those who follow me on Twitter know that I was fortunate enough to chat with Jason Fabek, artist of Darkside War and The Button and the Swamp Thing special, and some work on Detective, amongst other things. And Peter Tomasi, who just finished his Superman Rebirth run, is going to be hopping on Detective soon, is currently writing Super Sons. I've been really working on cleaning up the audio to those. It's been very difficult because we had them in a crowded convention, and my mic is meant to be like a stationary mic, and we were just kind of standing and talking and trying to check the sound level. So there's some background chatter, and it's hard, so I'm trying to clean that up so that we're both somewhat audible and prepare for that more in the future. So that's taken a lot of time for me, but I'm hoping to put that out within the next day or so, at least the Jason Fabek interview. I have a comics pull list episode that's been on the back burner since our last conversation last week. That will include like Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps issue 50, probably Adventures of Super Sons #1, and I might update the 3rd book to something a little bit more recent just to keep it a little bit more relevant. but that should be coming out soon. I'll be putting out an update video relatively soon for those who follow my stuff. You know, just letting you know like what's going to be going on with me as you know the semester starts, because I'm also a college student and I work full time, and I by no means have plans of stopping. I love doing this stuff and I want to continue, and but you know the things are going to change for a little bit. Things will probably slow down, so you know I will try to keep everyone updated. But that's pretty much what I have coming out. That interview with Jason Fabric, and hopefully an episode of Comics Pull List relatively soon.
Right on.
But again,
I look forward to that. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, it was, both of them were awesome, and both of them were really great guys, and they were gracious enough to donate their time at the convention to chatting with me, and they were both great to talk to. And I think that, you know, not to toot my own horn, but I think I did a much better job as an interviewer on both those occasions than I did with my first time. I think my first interview, Brian Hill was very, very gracious in dealing with my inexperience and my nerves, and I appreciate that, I think, more so than I will in any interview to come, because it was a very big learning curve for me doing that. And I think that shows in these interviews. I'm very proud, you know, in the way I conducted myself, because I was a little bit more prepared and less starstruck by getting to chat with a creator. But again, the content of those interviews is all up to those guys. Those guys gave great conversations, so I'm really excited for you guys to be able to listen to it.
Yeah, no, you did good. I quite enjoyed that Brian Hill interview. That was good, and you even read. I appreciate that you read some of my questions while you were talking to him. So I'm a little bit biased, so I was particularly pleased that he answered some questions on Cassandra Cain, who's my favorite character. So
yeah,
it was good to see.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, and again, for those of you, when we do those live interviews, we do take audience questions. Unfortunately, those other two that I'd mentioned that I'm editing right now were at a convention, so they will not be able to be taken live. But I think they came out pretty good, besides the audio quality. So, you know, again, Comic Boom, thank you for joining me. You know, I wouldn't be able to. I don't think the conversations would be nearly half as good without you being here and raising, you know, both similar and opposing opinions. So thanks again, man, for joining me.
No worries. Well, yeah, you guys, you can check me out at Comic Boom on Twitter at Metropolis40, on my channel Comic Boom on YouTube. I do reviews from time to time. And yeah, thanks for having me, Dark Knight. And until next week, we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for those of you, the link to his channel is already in the description. I will be putting up an end card at some point during the interview, but you know, go check him out. His work's awesome. He poses a lot of very intelligent conversation about comic books, and I think that's the thing that makes the community of comic book YouTubers so interesting, are the ones that are able to have those intellectual discussions about comic books. So go check him out. Awesome guy, as you can tell by our conversations together. And if you haven't already, go check out our last conversation. We discussed atheism and faith and belief in comics, and it was a great time. So again, thank you, Comic Boom, for chatting with me, and thank you to everybody who's watching in the audience live right now, and for those of you who are going to be watching this later. So you know, again, sincere thank you to everybody, and I hope we'll see everybody soon in our next chat of Let's Talk Comics. And this is good night from Dark Knight Nation and Comic Boom.